Chapter 31. Sakura watched Sasuke warily from the corner of her eye as she fidgeted nervously where she sat on a stump, knees pressed tightly together. Everything was just so, her whole world was turned upside down. Nothing really made sense anymore, not since the invasion. And now she was sitting here, waiting on her team again. It was just like they had before everything had changed. A part of her even hoped that nothing had really changed. Only she already knew that wasn't true. She could see Sasuke was agitated. He looked almost angry as he shifted about, his eyes darting not towards where Kakashi usually appear as they would before the invasion. Instead he kept looking towards where Naruto usually appeared in those times that she beat him here. That was another thing that didn't match up anymore. Normally, Naruto would have been here around the same time as Sasuke, or sometimes even before him. Only he wasn't here yet. And she couldn't find out what happened on his and Ino's date until he did. Finally she couldn't take it anymore, the nervous energy bubbling up inside of her needed a release. Standing up, she quietly walked towards the makeshift kunai and shuriken range, wood posts wrapped in frayed and weathered rope waiting down range. Reaching into her holster, she took a moment to orient herself, taking a deep breath, before in one fluid movement her finger hooked the ring of a kunai, her arm rose, her wrist flicked and the weapon was released. Thunk. Another, then another. The weapons clustering together, each around the first. Each counted out, each measured and exact. The aim wasn't perfect, but it was better than she had a few weeks ago. This time, she wasn't reaching for weapons she didn't have. Instead, when the last kunai had left her finger, she was almost already walking down range to retrieve them. Each blade was checked over quickly, efficiently, before it was slid back into its place in its holster. She walked back down the range, taking up a position 10 feet further from the target. Then she turned and, with another deep breath, began to throw them again. Thunk. 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 Thunk thunk. She froze for a moment when she saw a kunai embedding itself in another one of the posts on the range. For a moment, her eyes flicked to the side. She could see Sasuke, scowling lighten slightly as he released his kunai much the same as she had before. Breathing out a soft sigh of relief, she allowed a slight smile to curl over her lips as she resumed her earlier rhythm, launching the kunai down range with a firm thunk. Oh! Sasuke wasn't sure why she'd moved to the range after watching Sakura's first round of throws. The routine wasn't something terribly new, she'd done it herself dozens and dozens of times. Repetition hardwiring the motions into her mind and body, each flick sharp, precise. For a moment her mind flashed back to Itachi, watching her brother manipulate the kunai with precisely timed throws that reached targets beyond a direct throw. A skill she still hadn't mastered herself. A flash of irritation sent her kunai half an inch off from where she'd intended, causing it to click dangerously against the previous kunai. She immediately scowled. It certainly looked impressive, only she knew it was luck instead of skill. Her next throw struck deep, burying itself into the wood as she bit back a growl. Now she'd have to pry the kunai out. Then she'd have to make sure it hadn't been damaged, and then… So serious, Sasuke, Kakashi's voice cut in as he appeared behind the pair. It's good to see you both practicing so diligently, but you are just out of the hospital. Take it easy for a day or so. Sasuke bit down her response as she turned her head, glaring back at her sensei as she squared her shoulders and pointedly threw another kunai down the range. Seeing that he wasn't getting a response, Kakashi turned his head towards Sakura and looked downfield. Nice grouping, Sakura. Where'd you learn that fast draw technique? A flash of irritation splashed across Sakura's eyes as she glared at her instructor for a moment before stuffing it back down. I've been working with Marino-san and Yamanaka-san at TNI. Kakashi blinked, then blinked again as he stared at Sakura, and then his shoulders slumped. Are all my precious little students going to be stolen from me? You've got no one to blame for it but yourself, Anko's smirking voice cut in as she appeared in a swirl of leaves. Really, Anko-chan, how could you wound me like that? Kakashi paused a moment before perking up brightly. Oh, right, because it's the only way you can. This time it was Anko's turn to glare at the man, who merely smiled happily back at her. Just for that, you get to do the introductions. Introductions? Kakashi repeated, blinking slightly and his eye widened quickly. Already? Yup, better to get it over with, Anko agreed with a cheerful nod of her head. Where's Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi asked as he slowly glanced around, trying to locate the infamous pervert. Sleeping off drinking with Tsunade-sama, Shizune spoke up cheerfully as she stepped into view, smiling at Sasuke and Sakura and bowing lightly to them. Ah, you must be Naruto-kuen's teammates. A pleasure to meet you. I'm Shitsune. No hello for me, Shizune-chan? Kakashi asked with a mock pout as he looked at the woman. Kakashi-san, I could, but then they'd start wondering about why I called you Kashi-chan, and then I'd have to break out the pictures. You remember those pictures, don't you? She smiled beautifully at him. And, moving on, Kakashi said without skipping a beat. Where are they then? Yugugo's bringing them, Anko said simply as she shrugged her shoulders before arching a brow at Sakura, who immediately flushed and refused to meet her eyes. Oh, come on, cherry girl, you're not still upset about that, are you? You got valuable experience from it. Sakura muttered something incomprehensible under her breath, her face flushed. What did you do this time, Sakura? Sasuke asked with a sigh on her lips, and she sent a slight glare at her teammate. Sakura flushed darker and almost glared back at Sasuke, her lips tightening as her fingers clenched, but she refused to answer. I goaded her into fighting my own cute little student, Anko said brightly smiling as she grinned toothily at them. And she learned some valuable lessons from it and got an extra pair of teachers out of it. You don't have a student, Anko, Kakashi pointed out. Anko pulled out a piece of paper and stuck it in Kakashi's face. Yes, I do. He blinked, scanned the paper quickly, then palmed his face. Right, I stand corrected. You do have a student. Does no one stay with their original instructors anymore? Your Uchiha doesn't have a different sensei? Anko offered blandly before shrugging her shoulders slightly and waving towards Shizune. Heya, Zune-chan. Anko-chan, Shizune agreed with a soft smile on her face and a bow. This feels so nostalgic. Yeah, only one missings. Anko agreed before her voice trailed off and she sighed softly and shook her head. Well, there's a buzzkill. True, Shizune agreed with a sad smile of her own. Would you go with me to pay respects? Sure, it's about time I went again myself, Anko agreed with a nod. Wonderful, Shizune clapped her hands together once. I'm sure he'll be happy to know we're still thinking about him. Sakura bit her lip and looked curiously over at her sensei, only to blink at the sad, somber expression he wore on his face. Kakashi-sensei? Instantly the melancholy vanished into a cheerful smile as he ruffled her hair. Something the matter, Sakura-chan? She paused, trying to think of the right words. She wants to know who they're talking about, Sasuke stated simply, shrugging at the light glare Sakura sent at her. What? You know I'm right. Ah, Kakashi nodded as his smile became fixed. Ah, they're talking about the third apprentice, or I suppose it would be more appropriate to call him the first. Apprentice? Sakura repeated, confusion only growing on her face. Of the Sannin, Kakashi finished for her as he glanced over at where Anko and Shizune were quietly talking to one another, an occasional giggle and a look directed at him forcing him to ignore the tremor of dread it sent down his spine. Shizune-chan is apprentice to Tsunade-sama. Anko was apprentice to? He paused, his eyes flicking to Sasuke for a moment, the snake Sannin, before he turned traitor. Which leaves the fourth Hokage, Sakura finished, staring up at him with wide eyes, before turning those eyes onto Anko and Shizune in disbelief. Yeah. Damn, was he hot, Anko agreed as she glanced over at Shizune and smirked. Did you ever see him without his shirt on? Now, Anko-chan, that's highly inappropriate, I'd never have done something so foolish. Shizune stated as she lifted her nose into the air before breaking into a slight smirk. Not without making sure she wasn't in the country first. Heh, I was just a perverted brat, so she didn't mind, Anko noted with a chuckle. Though I think she was starting to get tired of me, accidentally, picking the wrong side of the hot springs. You were such a pervert, Shizune noted with a nod of her head in agreement. Were? Anko half demanded with amused, lidded eyes. Now, Kakashi spoke up, waving his hands quietly. You two can talk about which one of Jiraiya-sama's Ika scenes is your favorite later, he paused before smiling happily at them. Once I have time to get a notebook. You are such a pervert, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura stated simply as she blushed and looked away. Pot, kettle, Anko said simply with a smirk. Shizune glanced at where Sasuke was pinching her nose in irritation and smiled cheerfully at her. Yes, we do have to be this crazy. No one in their right mind will ever become a powerful ninja. At Sasuke's confused look, she winked at her. Anyone in their right mind would finish the academy, decline entering the ninja ranks, and instead just use their skills to keep in great shape and get laid. Perverts, all of you, perverts, Sasuke muttered as she reached up, rubbing at the base of her neck as she felt the twinge of the seal pulsing beneath her skin. We'll get you soon, my little pretty, Anko responded, rubbing her fingers together and leering hungrily at Sasuke, who immediately took an instinctive step backwards, a blush on her face. With silken lace and some nice shibari, fu. Anko-chan, restraint, please, Shizune admonished lightly. You need to wait at least 2 weeks before you're allowed to inflict any further psychological trauma of that level upon Sasuke-san here. Medic's orders. Ah, Anko gave an exaggerated pouted before sighing softly and grumbling. Fine. I still need to get them ready for the introductions, Kakashi stated simply as he cut in. Introductions? Shizun prompted, tilted her head to the side. To Sunshine and Bitch-chan. Anko agreed with a nod of her head and a toothy grin. They don't know? Shizun paused a moment before looking at Anko. Do you still keep emergency sake? Wordlessly, Anko pulled out a scroll and waved it helpfully in the air. Right, well, I suppose we should get comfortable for the show, Shizun noted as she settled down on a weathered and sanded stump at just the right height for a bench. I want to see how a proper preparation is done for something like this. Anko unrolled the scroll, then cut her thumb on her teeth and spread a smear of blood along the paper inside. A quiet puff of smoke and a trio of ceramic sake bottles appeared. Deftly, she caught the first two, one in each hand, while Shizun almost delicately captured the third and settled back as Anko took a seat next to her. I don't suppose it would do any good to ask you to at least pretend you're not finding me to be a source of amusement? Kakashi asked hopefully. Now, really, Kakashi-san, would I do something like that? Shizun arched a brow as she slowly rolled the bottle around her fingers. Taking pleasure in the discomfort and social awkwardness of the great genius of our generation? If I answer that question honestly, you'll start sharing those pictures, won't you? Kakashi noted blandly with a grimace. Shizun arched a brow and tilted her head to the side. Well, I was going to just ask Jiraiya-sama to give you some refresher training, but I will consider the merits of your proposition. And moving on, Kakashi said simply before turning his attention to Sakura and Sasuke. I'm sure I don't need to remind you both about what happened during the third stage of the exams. Immediately both Sakura and Sasuke stiffened. The pink-haired girl's face turning slightly to the side, averting from her instructor's gaze. Sasuke merely narrowed her eyes slightly and waited for him to continue. Well, it could have potentially been worse, if it wasn't for Naruto, Kakashi said carefully. Much, much worse. Yes, the idiot stopped Gaara, Sasuke said irritably as she glared back at Kakashi. I already know this. I'm not referring to what happened during the third stage, he corrected with a shake of his head. I'm referring to what occurred immediately after the second stage. Because of Naruto, we were actually aware of the invasion coming. He uncovered critical information. Naruto uncovered critical information? Sakura repeated dully as she stared back at Kakashi. Naruto did. Our Naruto. Yes, he agreed with a nod. Our Naruto. How the hell did the idiot do that? Sasuke demanded as she glared back at him. And if we knew it was coming, why didn't we know? If they'd known, my parents. Anger started to spark behind Sakura's eyes as she stared accusingly at Kakashi. Because it was classified, Sakura, Kakashi said simply as he affixed her with a look. No one outside of ANBU below the rank of Jounin was given explicit information about what was going on. Not even the Chunin we deployed in preparation. The risk was too high. Then why did we even have the third stage? Why didn't we just cancel and keep everyone away and safe? She demanded as her eyes began to stare wildly, desperately, up at Kakashi. Because we couldn't afford to lose face like that, Sasuke answered her as she looked directly at Kakashi. Because if we didn't, they'd just hide, get stronger and attack when we didn't know they were coming. And we wanted to have Suna over a barrel, Anko added helpfully. Thank you for your help, Anko, he said flatly and shook his head as he looked back at Sakura. This is what it means to live in a hidden village, Sakura. Your parents understood the risk of living here. Generally, a hidden is safe from the kind of threats that villages without an armed force suffer. But they are at times under attack from other villages like them. Sakura took a slow, deep breath before grudgingly nodding her head. What does Naruto of all people discovering the invasion have to do with introductions? Well, Kakashi paused there for a moment, reaching up and rubbing the back of his neck. You see, do you remember the preliminaries after the second stage? What about them? Sakura's eyes narrowed dangerously at the sheepish look on Kakashi's face. Do you remember who Naruto faced? He prompted helpfully. That hidden sound girl whose team tried to kill us. Sakura said slowly, staring at Kakashi in confusion. There was a moment of silence as the words sunk in before Sasuke demanded. How the hell did the idiot get her to say anything? 1. He isn't an idiot, a new voice cut in, and 2. He spanked it out of me. Anko's grin threatened to split her face entirely as she watched a resigned-looking Naruto follow a masked kin with Temari at his side and Yugugo's sword sheath poking at his back. Sakura blinked a moment before her eyes narrowed into furious slits. Next to her, Sasuke's eyes narrowed in a similar manner while her fingers clenched back into her palms. You! Sakura hissed angrily as her fingers reflexively slipped to her kunai pack and managed to hook a finger into one of the rings before Kakashi's hand caught her wrist. Sakura, she's not an enemy, Kakashi said with a quiet firmness. She tried to kill us. Sakura insisted angrily, her eyes never leaving Kin. I was following orders. It wasn't really anything personal, Kin answered back with a shrug of her shoulders and a bored tilt of her head. Besides, you lived. Rejoice and all that. Kin-chan, behave, Naruto said with a soft firmness as he gave her a look. Yes, Naruto-sama, she responded with a sigh as she crossed her arms almost petulantly across her chest. You know that's not going to last, Temari noted with a smirk upon her lips. That's what spankings are for, Naruto said with a slight frown of resignation. Naruto-sama? Sakura repeated, staring incredulously at the trio before the rest of the words caught up in her mind. Wait, spankings? Naruto. You pervert. Hey. She's the pervert. She'll only behave if I spank her. Naruto protested angrily. Yes, but you did grope me too, Temari noted helpfully, smiling wickedly over at Sakura and Sasuke. And it was so forceful. Naruto sent a look of pure betrayal at Temari, who grinned unrepentantly back at him. Gods damn it, Sunshine, are you trying to get us all killed? Now, Naruto-kun. It's perfectly natural and healthy for a growing boy to experience sexual urges, Shizune noted cheerfully before tapping her lower lip thoughtfully. You are remembering to use protection, aren't you? While I'm sure the world will whimper in terror at the thought of the resurgence of the Uzumaki, I think you might want to wait a few more years before you start. That way the girls can maximize production. Kin and Temari stared at Shizune with horror in their eyes as Naruto blushed a bright crimson while he tried to bury his face in his hands. Never mind, I think I'd rather them kill me now. Sasuke was staring, no, actually glaring at Naruto as she clenched her jaw and slowly worked her fingers from fists to splayed out, itching towards her own kunai holster before clenching again. Naruto? Please tell me you were stupid enough to take those two as spoils. Pausing, Sakura mouthed the word spoils in confusion as she stared back at her crush with her brow furrowed in confusion. What? Don't they teach kids anything these days? Yugugo asked in irritation as she crossed her arms about her chest. Yes, please, let's tell a group of newly hormonal adolescents about how there is a law that enables them to claim enemy combatants as property, Kakashi said sarcastically as he gave Yugugo a withering look that actually made the woman flinch slightly. You can be the one to deal with all the paperwork. I didn't take them as spoils, Naruto grumbled softly and he jerked a thumb at Kin. I took her as a spoil instead of executing her. Old man Hokage made me take Sunshine. And aren't you glad he did? Temari asked with a smirk as she put her hand on her hip and cocked it slightly to the side. No, not really, Naruto stated simply. And Naruto-sama isn't stupid, Kin added as she crossed her arms about her chest, thick-headed, yes. Stubborn beyond all comprehension, yes, but not stupid. He? Sakura began before Temari cut her off. Has mastered multiple A-rank techniques, Temari noted with a vague shrug of her shoulders. Most of which are pure manipulation of chakra. Multiple? Kakashi blinked a moment, then eyed Naruto carefully, as in more than the two you already had? Naruto suddenly grinned brightly, held up his hand and produced a swirling Rasengan. Yeah. The pervy sage taught me this. Naruto, when did he start teaching you that? Kakashi asked neutrally as he watched his student carefully. When we went looking for Granny, Naruto answered with a shrug while Shizune snorted softly in amusement. Kakashi paused a moment as he processed Naruto's statement, before looking questioningly towards Shizune, who simply nodded her head, her eyes twinkling and her lips threatening to break into mirthful laughter. Naruto, is the Granny you're referring to Tsunade-sama? Yup. Naruto agreed cheerfully before blinking slightly back at Kakashi. Who else would it be? Naruto. Sakura stared at him, looking absolutely scandalized. You don't refer to someone like the Hokage as Granny. Why not? I called the old man all the time. Naruto looked confused before shrugging his shoulders a bit. As Sakura gaped at Naruto, Kakashi spoke up again with a very careful voice. Naruto, did you learn the Rasengan in just a few weeks? About a week, why? Naruto tilted his head to the side in confusion, his brow furrowed. Then I moved on and worked on getting my claws better. Your claws? Sasuke repeated, staring dully at him. Yup. Naruto agreed, grinning broadly as he stepped over to a nearby tree and, with a swipe of his hand, for smooth gouges were rent into the trunk. Aren't they awesome? Sasuke stared for a moment as she struggled to comprehend exactly what Naruto was so casually displaying. Then she looked away, scowling softly as she growled just a bit, and then looked back at him. Glaring angrily, she spat, "Fight me." That made everyone in the area blink in surprise before Sakura quickly spoke up, Sasuke-kun. You just got out of the hospital. You shouldn't be fighting yet. I'm fine, she hissed angrily as she glared at Sakura before turning towards Naruto. Well, idiot? You going to accept or you going to? There will not be a fight, Kakashi cut in sharply. As Sakura said, you just left the hospital, you're in no condition to be jumping into a fight right now. Not to mention Naruto-sama would so totally kick your ass, Kin added in with a smirk on her lips. There's no way Sasuke would lose to Naruto, Sakura shot back glaring at Kin. Right, Temari drawled out. I mean, it's not like our master here has beaten a rampaging Jinchuriki that it took a Kage to stop previously, one that your precious Sasuke-kun couldn't stop. And it's not like he's got ridiculously powerful techniques. Nor like he's not got his own, original, likely to be classified as a forbidden technique. Ido? Naruto cut in with a look of confusion on his face. What you used on the guy who hurt Bitch-chan, she answered, gesturing vaguely towards Kin. Oh, that, Naruto nodded slightly as he blushed just a bit. Wait, don't Uchiha like to use fire techniques? Kin recalled before perking up, rubbing her hands together. Oh, yeah. Never mind, bring on the fight. No. Shizun cut in, her eyes suddenly hard. There will be no fight. We will not be putting the Uchiha back in the hospital, and Naruto-kun still needs practice with that particular technique before he can even think about using it in a spar. Anko and Kakashi both blinked at the vehement response from the previously collected woman before Anko glanced at Naruto for a moment, then looking back at Shizun, the brat's got a technique that dangerous? I've seen the results of it used on someone, Shizun stated flatly as she shook her head. At least with a Rasengan there's a chance to heal the damage, even if it's remote. With that technique. I wouldn't use that on Sasuke. Naruto protested before grunting softly. Even if he is a bastard and asking for it. Yeah, right, like he has something that dangerous, Sasuke said with a snort as she crossed her arms about her chest. Excuse me, Uchiha-chan, Shizun said with a venomously sweet voice, but when did you become a fully qualified trauma expert? She paused before lightly tapping her lower lip. Oh, that's right, you didn't. So, please, do tell me, Uchiha-chan, what qualifications do you have for judging the destructive potential for a technique you haven't even had described to you, let alone seen in person? Shizun-chan, Kakashi said gently as Sasuke flushed a brilliant crimson, I'd appreciate it if you didn't berate my genin quite so much. He paused as he then tilted his head to the side as he gave Sasuke a look, even if my student was improperly addressing a seasoned jounin and the apprentice of our new Hokage and should apologize. I apologize, Shizun-san, I will remember to be more careful with my choice in words in the future. Sasuke stated with a coolly schooled face as she struggled to not clench her fingers back into her fist. It would be best if you did, Uchiha-san, Shizun said simply as she looked back at her. And it would be best if you remembered that what you see on the surface hides what lurks in the depths unseen. I thank you for the reminder, Shizun-san, again, tightly controlled and crisp words. Enough of all that. After all this time, it's time we should have some nice relaxing team training. Kakashi spoke up cheerfully. I can help. Anko offered cheerfully, her eyes shining, so can you Gugo-chan. Kakashi paused a moment, glancing at his team and Naruto's spoils. What the hell, why not? Oh, damn it, Sasuke groaned softly as she leaned back the tree, her whole body aching from the training session her team had been through earlier. The training she'd done with Kakashi before the third stage hadn't been anywhere near this bad. It was like every little movement she made was making muscles she didn't know she had whimper in protest. She'd had to spend hours avoiding live kunai and blades along with her team. At first, it had been a challenge, the blades had been hard, but not impossible to dodge. A few minutes of it had been a nice warm-up. Surprisingly even Sakura had been able to keep up. But Naruto had just looked suspicious, wary, like things were going too well. After the warm-up, she found out why when suddenly she wasn't cleanly dodging everything anymore. Suddenly it had stopped being fun, and turned into an almost desperate dance to just survive. Both she and Sakura were bloody and sweating in short order. And while they were struggling with the wave of kunai and flashes of sword slashes, Naruto had grabbed the thrown weapons and used them to deflect the incoming attacks and throws in whatever way he could. She'd started mimicking him in short order, and even Sakura had made the attempt, to the four Jounin's nods of approval. But eventually, first Sakura and then, as much as she hated to admit it, she herself had faltered. Then Naruto had stepped in front of them and suddenly nothing came close to them. The kunai only came for a short burst, a small swarm testing out the sudden defense, and quickly flowed around them like water leaving them untouched. Naruto had protected them. She'd been weak and Naruto had stepped in to protect her. After everything that had happened, she couldn't even keep up with the dead last. She couldn't be weak, she wouldn't. She needed be stronger. She needed power. And then, suddenly, 4 figures descended from the sky, and she found herself staring at the smirking faces of 4 slightly older teens. Who the hell are you? Chapter 32. What? Naruto stared dumbly at the green flak vest on his hands as he stared back across the Hokage's desk at Tsunade. Are you really going to make me repeat myself, brat? Tsunade demanded as she lightly glared back at him. After Kakashi had called a break in training, with Sasuke and Sakura both practically collapsing in exhaustion after Anko and Yugugo's practice session, a messenger hawk had arrived. Kakashi had taken a quick glance through it before calling an early end to training and dismissing Naruto's teammates to recover. Anko, who'd snuck a look at the message, had smirked and elbowed Yugugo in the ribs lightly and whispered into her ear. While Naruto had been looking cluelessly back at Kakashi, his squad sensei had informed him that they'd been summoned to the Hokage's tower. With Shizune, Anko and Yugugo tagging along, Naruto, Kin and Temari had followed Kakashi. Naruto had been left cluelessly wondering what was going on as Kakashi had remained tight-lipped about the reason behind the summons. Then almost as soon as he was through the door, Tsunade had thrown the vest at him with a smirk and a single word, "Congratulations." Now, Naruto looked from the vest back to her, incomprehension written on his face. What? This is like Irika-sensei's. It's a Chunin vest, brat. You know, for Chunin to wear? Anko offered with a smirk. You did still want to be a Chunin, didn't you? I passed? Naruto stared, jaw hanging as he looked to Kakashi for comprehension as a snort came from the window. Of course you passed, you knucklehead, Jiraiya spoke up. After all that work you put in, everything you did, what do you think she's giving you a vest for? I just... Wow, Naruto stared in disbelief at the vest. I didn't really think I'd pass the first time. Oh? Naruto, doubting himself suddenly? How uncharacteristic, Kakashi noted as he playfully ruffled Naruto's hair. Nay, I knew I'd get it eventually, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said with a huff and a light glare at him before looking back at the vest with no small amount of awe. I just didn't think I'd get it the first time. Well, you earned it, Temari stated simply with a slight look of envy on her face. You played me. You humiliated me, she leaned in and breathed into his ear loud enough for everyone to hear. You dominated me. He dominated me first. Kin spoke up quickly with a slight huff as she glared back at Temari while she wrapped her arms about his arm. Tsunade palmed her face with a groan while Shizune hid her face behind her sleeve to mask her smile and Anko smirked broadly. From the window a perverted giggle could be heard as Jiraiya scribbled away in his notebook. Or at least he did until an empty sake bottle hit his head and knocked him out of the window. Now for the next, vital step, Yugugo announced solemnly as Naruto sent her a curious look. Updating your wardrobe. There's no way you're allowed to wear that vest with that outfit. Naruto blinked a moment, then felt Kin and Temari tightening their grips upon his arms while the various females around him all smirked predatory down at him. And that's my cue. See you later, Naruto. Kakashi said before vanishing in a swirl of leaves, leaving Naruto to his fate. Aw. Ino frowned softly as she sat behind the counter of her mother's flower shop, staring off into the distance, frowning slightly as she ran over her mother's words. She really had been such an idiot. And she hadn't been able to find Naruto when she went looking for him earlier. She realized halfway through her search that she didn't even know where Team 7's usual training ground was. After almost aimlessly wandering through a random selection of training grounds, she'd managed to come across Gai-sensei. It took her a moment to overcome the sheer force of personality that the Jounin held before she'd been able to ask him which training ground Team 7 used. She'd eventually managed to decipher where he was directing her after several rants and repeatedly declining his offer of aid. When she'd arrived, while the training ground showed signs of recent use, it was empty. She'd somehow managed to just miss them. This brought her to moping sadly in the flower shop in a funk of depression, feeling like a complete idiot and worrying about Naruto ever forgiving her. You know, you better not let Yugugo-chan catch you sulking like that, Anko's voice broke through her thoughts. At least not in any clothes you want to keep. Ah? Ino let out a soft exclamation as she saw her temporary sensei standing in front of her wearing a triumphant grin. You? Me what, my cute little student? Anko prompted, her brows waggling happily. Yes, Anko-sensei? Ino asked with a resigned sigh. Well, if you don't want to help us pick out the brat's new wardrobe, I can leave you here, Anko noted with a pause, before tapping her lower lip in thought. You're not still sulking about last night, are you? You know where he is? Ino's mouth dropped for a moment, before cursing softly, of course you know where he is. I spent all morning trying to find him, but you knew where to find him the whole time, didn't you? Of course I did. I am me, after all, Anko agreed with a smirk on her face. And you were watching me utterly screw up last night, weren't you? Ino stated as her shoulders slumped. So was the old pervert, Anko added with a chuckle as she shrugged her shoulders. Don't worry about it, it wasn't just your fault. Brat's just clueless. Yeah, but I should have known that, Ino argued back with a quiet grumble. I'm the one who's supposed to know how the mind works. Well, you're still young. Screwing up is a great way to learn to pay more attention, Anko noted and shrugged her shoulders. And this time, your screw-up didn't kill someone, just embarrassed the shit out of you. So save the depression for when your screw-up ends up getting someone killed. When? Ino repeated, staring back at Anko. The higher you get in rank, the more likely it becomes to happen, Anko stated simply, sobering quietly. It sucks, and when it happens, you'll either learn to deal with it and move on or you'll break. Ino shuddered quietly at the matter-of-fact tone in Anko's voice. She didn't need to ask to know that Anko was speaking from personal experience. Then she nodded her head. So, Naruto and new clothes? Yup. Why, I'm pretty sure if you play your cards right, you could even get him down to a nice, tight pair of shorts and nothing else, Anko agreed, smirking as she watched the way Ino's face flushed bright red and she averted her eyes. So, coming? Just a second, Ino said as she quickly ran inside and up to her room. A moment later, she came back down, silver bracelet again on her wrist. Okay, ready. Told my mom I need to head out. Heh, excellent, excellent, Anko agreed as she made no comment about the bracelet, letting her smirk speak for her. Now, onwards. Oh, no, Kin said flatly, her arms again crossed about her chest as she gave Naruto a look where he was holding up a jumpsuit. Not just no, but dear gods in heaven, ever merciful and generous, and oh. But Gai-sensei and Lee wear them. Naruto protested. All the more reason for a no then, Temari pointed out with a shake of her head. But, Naruto started to say before Ino's voice cut in. I'm pretty sure they were being clear about it, Ino noted as she stepped up. Besides, don't you want something that matches your new vest? Naruto immediately stiffened up before slowly turning to face her. Ino. Naruto, she answered back with a nod of her head. They settled into an uncomfortable silence, just staring at each other for several long moments, before Temari rolled her eyes and spoke up. Oh, will you two just stop standing there and make up already? Make up, or make out? Anko added playfully, her eyes dancing. Knowing my luck, both, Kin said with a mutter. Ino looked at Kin for a moment before shrugging her shoulders, suddenly grabbing Naruto by the back of his head and pulling him down into a kiss. For a moment, Naruto's eyes widened before closing his eyes and tentatively wrapping his arms about her waist and pulling her close. As they pressed more tightly together, they were allowed a moment of silence, before Kin's voice interrupted. You know, that wasn't an invitation, damn it. Kin whined softly as she glared at the two of them. I'm sorry, Ino said softly as she kissed his lower lip lightly. For? Naruto asked, confusion written on his face as his face flushed bright crimson. Ruining things at the end of the date, so we didn't do that last night. She paused a moment before giving him a look and clenched her fingers tightly at the back of his hair. Just don't get used to it. Okay, he agreed again as he stared back at her in confusion. Good. Now, let's get you looking good. Gag me, please, Kin muttered softly. How about with your panties so they stop getting in a bunch? Temari asked helpfully. How about less bitching and more getting him looking good before I tie you both up, gag you and do it all myself? Ino cut in as she gave both of them a look over her shoulder and arched a brow, glaring at them even though they both stood several inches taller than her. Damn it, she's serious, isn't she? Kin asked as she looked at Temari. Yes, I think she is, Temari agreed with a nod, before pulling over a shirt from a nearby rack. How about we start with this? Good girl, Ino said with a smirk as Naruto felt a sinking realization that his life had just taken a turn for the troublesome. Oh. Sasuke stared dully back at the gates of Konoha as she curled one knee back up against her chest and rested her arms atop it. As she stared, her mind drifted back to earlier. When she'd met the Sound Four and been informed about the price of the seal Orochimaru had placed on her. Power. In exchange for everything else. Her home, her team, her loyalty, her freedom. Everything in exchange for the gift of power to defeat Itachi. Power that didn't cost her hands to be covered in Naru in a friend's blood. Power. That was what she wanted. That was what she needed. Wasn't it? Don't live your life for revenge, it will only destroy you in the end. Stay with your friends, your comrades. Vengeance isn't worth what it will cost you. Kakashi's words echoed through her mind, making her whole body tremble, anger, guilt, pulsing acidic and venomous through her veins. Who was he to lecture her? Who was he to claim he understood what was important to her? All the people that mattered to me like that are already dead. They weren't his family. They weren't his clan. They weren't watching him, they weren't waiting for him to avenge them. She could feel it, that demand, that expectation. Uchiha pride demanded nothing less. Demanded satisfaction. She was an Uchiha. She was Sasuke? Sakura. Dimly Sasuke recognized her, her shoulders stiffening, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at her teammate, glaring slightly. She wasn't supposed to be here. Sakura. What are you doing out here? It was an innocent enough question, but Sasuke could hear the undertone, the fear underneath it. So she didn't answer as she turned her head away and stared out into the distance, her eyes catching the distant carvings of the Hokage monument. Unconsciously, she lifted her fingers up, rubbing at the dull throb of the cursed seal on her neck. It burned in time with the words, the poisonous promises of the Sound Four dripping through her thoughts. Power. Where she wasn't held back, where she could become strong. Stronger than even Itachi. Please, don't, Sakura said softly. Please, just stay here. Stay with us. Stay with you, you mean, Sasuke said bitterly as she turned her eyes for a moment, staring at Sakura with bloody crimson Sharingan eyes swirling angrily. Stay here, be the Sasuke-kun you always kept pretending I was. Sasuke-kun. Sakura flinched back, staring back, confusion written across her features. And suddenly it was like her vision of Sasuke shattered, melting away. In its place, Sasuke was decidedly feminine looking. No, she realized as she stared back into angry, thick-lashed eyes. Female. Wah. Supposedly smartest girl in the class, but she couldn't notice that the boy she was chasing was nothing but an illusion, she said with a sneer before she shook her head and looked away, staring out into the looming shadows of the forest beyond Konoha's walls. You. Sasuke, you're a girl? But. Sakura stumbled over the sudden revelation, her mouth hanging slightly as stared at her teammate. I'm an Uchiha. Don't you remember what the academy told you? We're talented in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, she gave a bitter chuckle as she shook her head. So don't pretend you ever knew me, Sakura. You know nothing about me. But. She froze, her eyes glistening, tearing up as she stared back at him. You were still my friend. Still my teammate. Sasuke flinched back so softly it barely looked like anything beyond a spasming muscle, but it still struck, I don't need friends. I told you from the start, my goal is to kill him. Nothing else matters. Only satisfying that. Then we can do it together. Sakura took a desperate step forward, all of us. Team 7. We can do it together. With Kakashi-sensei and Naruto. You don't need to leave. You mean stay here and watch while the dead last rises above me? Stay here and watch as he walks around with those two little sluts of his? While he goes on his dates with Ino, laughing, smiling at the world when he understands nothing. Sasuke demanded, her eyes burning, Sharingan spinning wildly as she glared back at Sakura. Don't do this, Sasuke. Not like this. Sakura pleaded desperately, tears filling her eyes. Please, not like this, not to Orochimaru, please don't, not to them. Why not? Why shouldn't I? What the hell is so important about it? Sasuke demanded, sneering back at her. Because they killed them. Sakura's voice broke as she stared at Sasuke, tears streaming down her face. They killed my parents. They were just civilians. They'd never hurt anyone. They weren't ninja. But they cut them down like they were trash. I lost my family to them. Please. I can't lose you to them too. I don't care. The words came surprisingly easily to her lips, even as she forced herself to ignore the burning bile rising up her throat. What? The word was brittle, oh so brittle as it left Sakura's throat. I don't care, Sasuke repeated, half to herself as she refused to look at Sakura. I don't care that some worthless civilians were killed because they were too weak to defend themselves. Sakura stared at her, horror written on her face before she could feel the almost audible snap cracking inside of her, and her scream rose like a howl in the air. Traitor. Oh. Naruto shifted slightly as he walked next to Ino, tugging at the high collar of his new vest as he unconsciously brought his fingers down to check the newly filled compartments of his vest. Beneath it he wore a long-sleeved gray jacket and sturdy charcoal pants with pouches in the same location at his old outfit. Sighing, he shook his head and grunted softly. I feel so bland, he complained lightly. Well, you don't always want to draw attention to you, you know, Naruto-sama, Kin pointed out from behind them where she followed next to Temari. Besides, you draw enough attention with your personality, Ino said with a nod of her head. You mean when he's yelling at the top of his lungs? Temari offered. That too, Ino agreed with a smirk as she firmly kept her arm wrapped about Naruto's. Aren't you supposed to be on my side? Naruto asked with a grunting whine as he glanced at Temari and Kin over his shoulder. Only if you order me to be, Temari responded back with a smirk. Damn it, he said with a grunt. And you'd probably half-ass that, wouldn't you, sunshine? Probably, she agreed with a nod. Traitor. The furious scream roared through the air as they passed by the gate. Wait, isn't that Sakura? Ino said as she disengaged herself from Naruto's arm and started to run towards the location of the scream. It sounded like it was. Naruto agreed, easily keeping pace with her. Well, hopefully this means I get to hurt someone, Kin muttered as she and Temari moved after them. We might just, Temari agreed as they followed on Naruto and Ino's heels. Sakura! Ino shouted out as she saw a figure looming over a familiar pink head of hair, their fist cocked back and ready to strike. At the sound of Ino's voice, the figure started for a moment, seeing the group running towards them. Immediately the figure let go of Sakura. With an impressive display of speed, the figure made towards the forest. With one motion, Naruto summoned up a small group of clones and sent them after the figure before he and Ino slid to a stop at Sakura. Sakura was coughing violently as she struggled to catch her breath while her hands clutched at her stomach. Immediately Ino kneeled down, rubbing her back trying to help her breath. Sakura. What happened? Sasuke, Sakura coughed out as she rubbed at her stomach softly. Traitor. Going to. Sound. Tried to stop her. There was a pause as she looked over and found Naruto's eyes, locking onto them with a look of pure, absolute hatred. Go. Stop. Stop her. Or kill her. Naruto summoned forth another group of clones, his mind glossing over the way Sakura referred to Sasuke as a girl as he sent a group of them towards the tower and left two there. I'm going with you, Ino said angrily, her eyes burning, before she looked at Sakura for confirmation. You'll be okay, right? Sakura coughed again and then gave her a thumbs up in acknowledgement. Ino let one of Naruto's clones take Sakura from her before she glanced towards Kin and Temari. They shared a look nodded as they looked at her. You two are coming, I take it? For a chance to mess up the pretty boy? Hell yeah, Kin agreed with a nod. Might as well, Temari agreed. Then let's go, Naruto stated with a growl, the bastard is gonna pay for what he did to Sakura. And without a word they ran into the forest, following the trail left by the clones Naruto had released earlier. Oh, you should tell her, Naruto-sama, Kin spoke up softly as she slid into position next to Naruto as they moved through the trees following the trail they'd been left. This isn't the best time, Naruto shot back with a growl as he kept his focus straight ahead, catching another fresh slash in a tree and following its direction. She needs to know what to expect if you go all out, Kin answered back before a flash of worry crossed her features. Because? Orochimaru probably has a retrieval waiting for him, and us. She needs to be able to focus, Naruto countered back. She needs to not freak out when in the middle of combat because you started using the red stuff, she responded back. You think she'll be able to focus if she doesn't know to expect that? He growled again, his jaw clenching as he dug his fingers into his palms. And you're already almost there, Temari added as she came up on them. I can feel it. Your anger, your rage. The power waiting for you. What are you three talking about? We need to catch that bastard. Ino stated with a glare. We can't let him get away. We're talking about? Kin started to say, only to be cut off by a growl and a glare from Naruto. You're going to have to trust her about it eventually, Temari stated quietly. Damn it. Naruto growled angrily. I was having a good day, damn it. Why can't I just have a good day? Naruto, what the hell? Ino could feel the air thickening with something in the air, something that scared her. Fine, Naruto growled as the lines on his face seemed to thicken, roughening. The fourth didn't kill the QB. He sealed him into me, making me a Jinchuriki. What? She faltered for a moment, almost falling from the branch before he caught her. She could see the claws tipping his fingers, though he took care to not dig them into her skin. When she looked up, she could see his eyes looking back at her. Not the deep, pure blue she was familiar with, but a deep, bloody red with a slitted pupil. When she was again on sure footing, he released her and took a step back. It's a village secret. Nobody our age is supposed to know. It's why most of the older generations don't like me. Naruto? Ino's mind was a whirling, chaotic mess as she stared back at him. It's why your dad said you shouldn't use your clan techniques on me, ever, he continued, looking away and shifting slightly. You could end up coming in contact with him. For a moment she stared at him, not sure what to say, not sure what to do. If you can't handle it, turn and get back to Konoha and make sure Sakura-chan's okay, he said simply before turning back in the direction they'd been headed. I can stop Sasuke without you. Oh, hell no. That snapped her out of what loop his words threw her into. You're not getting rid of me that easy. If you're going on, so am I. Ino? he started to say as he turned his head back towards her, only to feel her grabbing hold of his vest and pulling him to face her. "That's Ino-chan to you, Naruto Uzumaki," she said with a growl as she pulled him over and gave him a rough kiss before glaring back up into his eyes. "And you are not getting rid of me that easily. Wouldn't that count as accosting a superior?" Temari noted in a throaty, amused tone as her own eyes bled crimson like her master's. "Naruto, why are their eyes like yours?" Ino asked, blushing lightly as she released her grip on his vest and saw the way Temari and Kin both developed features like he did. "The seal that got put on them when they were bound to me," he said, blushing brightly as he lightly flicked his tongue over his lips, tasting them nervously. "We get access to the red stuff when he accesses it," Kin said with a leering smirk as her eyes burned hungrily back at her. "And a lot more chakra than we had before. Are we going to stand around all day, or are we going to hunt down a traitor?" Temari asked again, her closed fan rolling about her wrist and hand. "Because the more time we waste here, the further the bastard is getting," Ino agreed, her eyes narrowed into slits before she gave Naruto a look. "We're going to talk about this later, Naruto-kun." "Right," he agreed, tensing to jump again, only to wince when she jabbed him in the side with a finger. "What?" "Yes, what?" she prompted with a light glare. "Yes, Ino-chan," he offered carefully. "Much better," she agreed with a nod as she launched herself off of the tree branch. "Damn it, I knew there'd be no getting rid of her." Kin grumbled as she launched herself after Ino, Temari following only half an instant later. Naruto joined them after only a moment's confusion as he struggled to figure out exactly what had just happened, before quickly shoving it out of the way. That could wait. Right now, Sasuke had turned traitor and hurt Sakura. That was all that he needed to worry about right now. Once he dealt with the bastard, then he could deal with Ino. And maybe by then things with her would actually make sense. For some reason, though, he found himself doubting it. Chapter 33. Sasuke burst into the clearing, drenched in sweat and panting tiredly from the desperate sprint she'd put in attempting to escape, combined with the exhaustion from her earlier training session. "Well, look who decided to show up," a girl with red hair drawled out with a smirk as she looked towards her companions, "and we didn't even have to go meet him like you were planning, Sakan?" "So it seems, Tayuya." "Welcome, Sasuke-sama," the white-haired boy greeted with a smirk. "We do apologize about the unpleasantness earlier, we simply wanted to take measure of. We need to go, now," Sasuke stated as she quickly glanced over her shoulder, straining her ears to pick up sounds of pursuit. "Oi! What do you mean, we need to go?" a thick boy asked, his small, beady eyes narrowing into slits. "You followed or something?" "Be quiet," Jirubu, the last member, a six-armed boy, stated as he spat out a golden substance into the form of a bow. "Looks like our great, future leader didn't quite live up to Orochimaru-sama's expectations, huh? Who is following you, Sasuke-sama?" Sakan asked simply as he tilted his head to the side, eyes narrowing slowly. "Naruto, and his group. He'll probably be here any second." "We need to go," Sasuke hissed out as she unconsciously pushed her hand up against the pulsing, hungry seal throbbing at the base of her neck. "Your teammate?" Tayuya snorted softly, "wasn't he supposed to be the dead last or something?" "Tayuya, you noticed how that bastard Kabuto was short an arm when he and Orochimaru-sama came back?" the six-armed boy asked as he strung up his bow and spat out a golden-looking arrow. "What the fuck about it, Kidumaru?" she demanded with a grunt as she nonetheless brought out her flute and eyed the woods warily. "That was done by a kid named Naruto," Kidumaru responded as he notched the arrow and looked around. "One from Konoha." In those moments the four-sound Nin had been speaking, Sasuke took a moment to calm herself, centering herself with several deep breaths. It was just Naruto, and Ino, and probably those damned spoils of his. They wouldn't be too much of a problem, Naruto had apparently beaten them pretty damned easily, so the four Orochimaru had sent should be able to defeat them without much issue. That left Naruto. Naruto, who had apparently grown at an insane pace. Naruto, who had been training under a Sannin, potentially even two. Naruto, who she hadn't really seen in action in almost 2 months. He'd still only be one and he just got in a lucky shot at Kabuto, Sakan stated simply as he narrowed his eyes. "There are 5 of us and if we have to, we can invoke the power of our seals." "He won't be alone," Sasuke stated softly, calmed down and glanced back over her shoulder. Just in time to see a trio of familiar blonde figures shoot out of the forest, straight towards her. As she quickly jumped back away from them, Kidumaru launched his arrow, shooting out faster than any kunai she could have thrown, straight at the chest of the lead figure. A foot in front of him, it split in half and parted harmlessly around him. All 3 of them lanced in a feral crouch, glaring up at Sasuke in a loose triangle formation. Well, fuck, Kidomaru grunted as he formed a group of sickles from his golden webbing. Didn't expect him to have a level that high. Sasuke, the lead figure, stated with an angry glare. You're coming with us. Ha, cocky little bastards, aren't they? Tayuya grunted out as she narrowed her eyes warily. Guess Konoha trash likes to run their mouths. Listen, you dumb shits, he's leaving of his own will. You really ready to do for that? The lead Naruto flicked his eyes towards Tayuya and suddenly the clone at his left shot straight at her. A flick of his eyes again and the clone at his right was moving straight towards Jirubu. Then, his eyes landed back on Sasuke. You hurt Sakura, he said softly. You're going to pay. And with that, he launched forward with a roar. Immediately, Kidomaru launched a wave of sickles at the lead Naruto clone, only to curse and twist as the one moving towards Jirubu threw a pair of kunai at him. He twisted out of the way, only to have to send out a spitting blast of webbing to stop the two kunai he'd leaned into the path of from the clone moving towards Tayuya. He oriented himself again, just in time for Jirubu and Tayuya to react to their opponents. Jirubu slammed his palm into the ground with a ground, blasting out a wave of dirt and rocks straight towards the rushing clone. Tayuya cut her thumb on her tooth and slammed her palm down into the ground herself, only, in a small explosion of smoke, 3 hulking figures loomed around her. Jirubu stumbled back when he felt the hard impact of the clone's heel cracking down on his upraised arms when the wave of dirt and rock had parted around him. Following that, the Naruto clone had flipped forward, smashing down on Jirubu's arm with a powerful kick. Then the Sound Nin could feel the telltale tug of chakra being applied to his skin by the boy's foot, before he felt the knee driving up under his arms and smashing his nose. Growling angrily, he grabbed hold of the clone's ankle and then snarled as he moved to smash the clone down into the earth in front of him. In response, the clone desperately twisted its body forward as much as it could before swiping his fingers down. For lines of crimson blossomed across Jirubu's face and down his chest, but he never relaxed his grip as he slammed the clone down into the ground. Through blood-stung eyes, Jirubu could swear he saw the clone smirking back at him before it exploded into smoke. Jirubu's response was a bellow of pain and rage. Tayuya had moved back, letting the hulking forms of her doki fill the gap between herself and the clone as she brought her flute up to her lips. Before the first note even rose, one of her doki hunched forward, a wet, wheezing gurgle escaping it, before crumpling back and dispersing in a puff of chakra smoke. Before it, the clone was holding up a swirling Rasengan and glaring angrily at her. Then the note started to flow and he had to jump and twist out of the way of the 2 remaining doki. Furiously glaring, she watched as cuts ripped across her summon's chests and arms. The clone swiped at them and the wounds rose up, cut into them from almost a foot away. Angrily she let a quick series of notes, the sounds pulsing into the air, and the doki moved in unison, attempting to strike him, though it quickly became evident that she wasn't quite used to directing only 2 of them. The melody seemed disjointed, haphazard, but still it kept the clone moving. And move he did, twisting just out of the way of some of the blows, jumping, ducking, weaving while he would jump in, make a quick slash then jump back out. Unfortunately, the clone failed to pay enough attention to its surroundings and launched itself back from a particularly powerful blow, straight into Tayuya's waiting fist as it held an expression of disbelief before it exploded. Kidomaru sent a blast of webbing straight at the clone lunging towards him, only to watch as it parted around him just as his arrow had. In front of him, Sakon placed himself between Naruto and Sasuke, smirking as he slowly licked his lips in anticipation. Sasuke frowned, tensing warily as she let her eyes dart around. Only 2 clones weren't Naruto's style, and she hadn't seen either of the spoils. As Sakon shifted about, he grinned at the figure. Shall we see what kind of melody we can play with you, Play with this, the clone snarled as a Rasengan swirled into existence in his open palm and he slammed it towards Sakon's gut. Only suddenly a pair of hands sprouted out of Sakon's stomach and grabbed hold of the clone's wrist before the attack could land. Growling angrily, he dispersed the Rasengan and swung his other hand forward like a claw, only to feel Sakon grabbing his wrist with a smirk. Did you really think trash like you could come here and get away with running your mouth like that? His free hand cocked back, smirking at the blonde. Obviously, you need a lesson in knowing when you. His words trailed off into a sudden scream as the clone's fingers above Sakon's stomach had opened, then snapped shut and blood suddenly flowed out of a torn stomach. Reflexively, Sakon released the clone, pushing him away as he brought his hands down on his stomach, pressing over them with a hiss of anger. I'm going to tear you apart. The clone could only watch in disbelief, as the wound knitted itself back together beneath Sakon's hand, then twisted out of the way of a thrown scythe from Kidomaru as the 6-armed Nin jumped forward. Grinning eagerly, he blasted out webbing all around the clone. The threads never quite touched him, never got close enough to be cut by his defense, but bit by bit they hemmed him in until he vanished behind an oversized cocoon. Now, let's see, how shall I play, Kidomaru asked as he stalked around the cocoon. This one is mine, Sakan declared with a growl as he rubbed his stomach. You already had your turn, it's mine again, Kidomaru countered as he glared back at Sakan. Finally, realization hit Sasuke, her eyes widening in shock. No. That's not Naruto. That's a clone. Before they could respond, 5 slashes tore through the cocoon, parting it. Before the Naruto clone stepped out with a glare, it's going to take a lot more than a bunch of spit to stop me. The clone began to pull itself out of the cocoon as Kidomaru smirked and moved in, tossing up a couple of his scythes into the air. Overhead they cut through a weaker series of threads and suddenly a rain of golden spikes fell down, straight towards the Naruto clone. Moving swiftly, the clone managed to dodge the spears and the sudden throw of a pair of sickles headed for him, before he was knocked down by one of the sickles Kidomaru had tossed up, the hook digging into his shoulder with a wet puncturing sound. You mean like that? Kidomaru pointed out with a smirk, only to see the bleeding figure smirking back at him. Yeah, the bastard was right after all. I'm just a clone. There was a vicious smirk on the clone's lips. Well, bring the real one on, Kidomaru started to say, smirking softly as he started to turn in the direction the clones had first appeared. It was then that the air in the clearing suddenly grew thick, heavy, as it weighed down upon the 5 young nin. What the hell is that? Tayuya demanded, as she shifted back, fighting the cold sweat threatening to break out on her skin. He's here, the clone whispered out, loud enough for them all to hear, before it dispersed in a puff of smoke. Now where? Kidomaru looked around, his eyes narrowed as he reached up towards his forehead protector. It was then a crimson-coated form led by a swirling orb fell upon him, smashing into him like a falling star as a raisingan smashed into his shoulder, and suddenly a rolling cloud of dust filled the air with Kidomaru's scream. Instinctively the other 4 nin leapt back away from the rising cloud, as a palpable miasma of bloodthirsty rage consumed the air. Like a curtain falling, the dust suddenly dropped, dragged back to the earth to reveal the crouching form of Naruto, surrounded in boiling crimson chakra, standing atop of the destroyed body of Kidomaru. Sasuke stared at him in shock as the dark, feral glare burned into eyes, her Sharingan reflexively activating, capturing the look of pure, undisguised loathing, hate and betrayal etched upon those features, all screaming as they focused on her. In front of the bleeding Jirubu, Temari dropped down, eyeing the thick teen with a look of distaste as she lightly spun her fans about her wrists. Damn, I get stuck with the pig. As Jirubu fought between worry and rage at the scene unfolding in front of him, Kin dropped in front of Tayuya, looking at her for a moment with dark, narrowed eyes, before straightening up as she tilted her head to the side. Well, this should be fun. I never did get to properly thank you for all the encouragement you used to give me, Tayuya-senpai. You. Tayuya's eyes widened in recognition before narrowing into slits as she activated the first stage of her cursed seal. You traitorous little bitch. What, just because I picked a better master? Kin smirked back at Tayuya as she held up her fingers for a moment, and suddenly, where there had 1, there were 10. That's the sound way, isn't it? Selling ourselves, our loyalty, our souls and freedom to the ones who grant us power. I simply got a better deal than you did. Ino was the last to appear, landing on the ground next to Naruto, standing tall and proud as she glared at Sasuke. Traitor. You're not getting away, Sasuke, Naruto's voice burned as he glared back at the Uchiha. You know. Sasuke-sama, you have such interesting friends. Such spirited pieces of trash, Sakan noted before suddenly his curse seal spread across his skin. Let's see how much you squirm. With that, Sakan suddenly lunged forward, faster than he had moved before, heading straight for Naruto. With a sudden pulse, Naruto launched himself forward as well, his path straight towards the approaching Sakan, fist already cocked. Before he knew it, Sakan suddenly felt the smash of Naruto's fist cracking into his face, sending him flying back, with Naruto launching after him with snarl. Left alone, Sasuke narrowed her eyes and slowly took a ready stance. You can't beat me, Yamanaka. Most days, you're probably right, Ino agreed as a kunai twirled into each of her hands in a backhanded grip. But you're favoring your right side while keeping your weight off your left. Your hair is matted, thick, your clothes are damp and your stink is filling the air. And on top of that? I want to make you hurt. So this time? This time, Uchiha, you're dead wrong. A chill ran down her spine and Sasuke shifted defensively. Beating me when I'm weak means nothing. I'm a ninja, Uchiha-san, she responded with a bloodthirsty grin taken straight from Anko's repertoire. How you get your win doesn't matter, only that you won. Oh, I'm going to destroy you. Jirubu growled angrily from beneath bloody eyes as he thrust forward straight at Temari. Temari instead twisted to the side as his arm came within range. She gestured, a graceful, almost dancing motion as her fan snapped open, revealing the razor-sharp blades within. In a flash they cut against the back of Jirubu's elbow before snapping shut and rolling into her waiting hand. As Jirubu fought down a scream of pain and cradled his arm, Temari snapped the fan open and hid her face beneath her eyes behind the bloody fan. Did that hurt? It certainly looked like it. Want me to kiss it and make it better? Bitch, he snarled angrily before reaching down, attempting to rip up something from the earth, only to grunt and hiss as his arm buckled ineffectually beneath the pressure. Damn it. Such language, and in front of a lady, Temari smirked as the fan snapped shut and she lightly tapped her lower lip in though. I suppose I could forgive you, if you got down on your knees and begged forgiveness. I only need one arm to wipe that smirk from your face. Jirubu snarled and lunged forward with a powerful blow from his unwounded arm. Clinically, Temari could tell he was powerful. He had a lot of strength in his frame and he channeled it properly into a single, focused strike. It was the kind of blow that only the strongest of individuals wouldn't be staggered or even disabled from. So she simply made certain he didn't hit her. Which, she had to admit, wasn't as easy as she thought it would be, especially when he began to invoke his cursed seal. As the distorted patterns crept over bloodied and torn features, she found it more difficult to stay a step ahead of the savage fighter. Each time her fan struck out, their cuts grew steadily shallower as time passed. Well, this is a bother, Temari noted with a slight sigh. Oh. Tayuya had wasted little time invoking the full strength of the first level of her seal only to growl as suddenly herself and her doki were buried to their ankles in the earth where the kin clones were smirking at her, holding their hands down on the earth. You think I'm worried about trash like you with a couple of new little tricks? Tayuya snarled as she glared back at Kin. While you were jerking around as bait with those two fuckheads, Dosu and Zaku, I made my way into the elite. Kin nodded her head making a flapping motion with her hand as she tilted her head to the side and flicked a sunban at Tayuya, who easily deflected it with her flute. Big, bad Tayuya, north gate of the Sound 4. Watch out or she'll eat you alive. Damned straight. Tayuya agreed with a snarl, her skin darkened and her hat exploded out as a crown of horns grew wreathing her head as she reached the second state of her cursed seal and suddenly ripped herself free from the earth. I survived for this strength. I died for this strength. I sure as hell won't lose to a bitch like you. And with a sudden note the two doki surged forward, breaking out of the earth trap and opening up their mouths as a sickly, hungering erupting of spiritual energy took shape and then hungrily lunged towards the kin clones. In response, each clone threw a series of sunban at the doki with a startling force. For a moment the creatures paused, frozen as the sunban pierced into the cloth covering their faces before, with a gurgling moan, they fell to their knees and then dispersed. You were always so proud of that you got that seal, Kin noted as she glared back at Tayuya, her eyes narrowed into slits. How you were chosen to be an experiment and live to tell the tale. It shows I'm strong, you little. Tayuya snarled as she shifted into a ready stance. You think that's strength? Kin grinned, her eyes burning hungrily. You think you're special because you've got a seal on you from a Sannin? Because your master gives you strength? You think that's funny? Tayuya demanded, her eyes narrowed into slits. She giggled then, amusement flashing through her eyes. Well, Tayuya-chan. Yes I do. Because I've got one too. Only the Sannin who made mine is better with seals than the one who made yours and the power my master gives me. Suddenly Tayuya was hit by another blast of that rolling, thickening of the air as bubbling crimson chakra leaked out of Kin's body, her eyes turning a deep, hungry blood red, and her toothy grin turned fanged. Shifting slightly, she brought up her clawed fingers, flexing them for Tayuya to see as she grinned eagerly at her and spoke. It's just plain better than the one your master gave you. She rolled her neck at that, sending an audible ripple of pops into the air as she crouched forward, body tensed. But don't worry, Tayuya-chan, I don't expect you to just believe it because I said it. I'm going to have fun beating this into your head like a drum. And like a shot, she slammed forward straight towards Tayuya. Oh! Naruto frowned as he watched his opponent. The gray-haired boy was smirking confidently at him. It was rather irritating considering he really could just. An image flashed through his mind, Sakan's face split down the center, shocked before he fell into two bloody halves. It would be easy, the enemy Nin was already almost within range, a lunge and it would be done. Simple, easy. And his opponent would be dead. A part of him dimly pointed out that he'd already probably killed the other Nin just moments ago, but it was quietly dismissed as irrelevant. Then another part of him pointed out simply that he wasn't the type to take the easy way. Another, dimmer, part of him remembered the advice that relying on the same trick over and over again instead of figuring out new ones, was a surefire way to end up dead and buried. So, with a growl, he rushed forward, his eyes flashing darkly as Sakan's widened in surprise at the speed of his approach. In response, Sakan kicked out at Naruto, his leg suddenly becoming 3 as he kicked out at Naruto's side. The kicks landed hard against Naruto's sides only to have the boy growled in response as he grabbed the leg and dug his clawed fingers into the calf, piercing the flesh roughly. Immediately the extra legs vanished as fists leaped out from Sakan's stomach and pounded into Naruto's gut. Forced to release the leg, Naruto formed a Rasengan in his hand and swiped at Sakan's hip. The gray-haired boy twisted and dodged for the most part, but the Rasengan still ground the flesh of the hip raw. In response, Sakan produced a kunai in his free hand as he used his free hand to twirl into a slash across Naruto's arm. Gritting his teeth in response, Naruto brought his other hand down, slashing the air with wind blades, and forcing Sakan to limp back and put some distance between the two of them. For a moment the gray-haired figure watched Naruto with narrowed eyes before smirking back at him. "Not bad, you're almost the worst kind of opponent for me to face, a close-quarters specialist like myself," Sakan smirked then as he shifted slightly and the wounds on his leg and hip knitted back together, "but I can put myself back together, can you?" In response, Naruto smirked slightly and held up his arm, then clenched his fist as the crimson chakra bubbled up for a moment and the wound quickly sealed back up with a quiet hiss of air. "Brother," another voice spoke up as another head formed atop Sakan's body. "Why are you drawing this out? Why haven't you just killed him already? He's such an interesting opponent, Yukon. It's been so long since someone was able to hurt us like that, since Kimimaro." Sakan stated simply as he slowly ran his tongue over his lips. "I was simply savoring the experience. We don't have time to play your games. We're expected back," Yukon snapped back with a glare. "Let's just kill him quickly and be done with it." Fine, Sakan agreed sourly before smirking back at Naruto. "It would seem we're going to just show you the full power of Orochimaru's seal." And with that the twisting pattern rippling across his flesh spread further, consuming the entirety of his form as his scara turned black and his features turned demonic. A horn rose out of the opposite sides of each of their heads, their teeth grew jagged and their jaws pointed. With matching smirks turned upon him, Naruto narrowed his eyes as he watched the way their bodies seemed to bulge out to the side, separating into two distinct forms. "Now to end this," Yukon stated eagerly as he tensed in anticipation. "2 words," Naruto growled back with narrowed eyes as he brought his hands together. "Kagebunshin." "Oh." Sasuke wasted little time, launching straight towards Ino as fast as she could manage. On most days it would have been fast enough to overcome her opponent's reflexes. Today, Ino twisted beneath an arching snap kick that, at full speed and strength, would have sent her flying. When Sasuke arched and spun down into a sweep, Ino twirled, blade slashing out, taking a line of crimson from Sasuke's leg. Then she landed, her whole body still twisting, adding the force of momentum to her throws as she released both her kunai, sending them flying straight toward Sasuke's favored side. As the Uchiha stretched away, keeping her grimace suppressed, Ino attempted to snap a kick at her other side, towards her hip. Her eyes narrowed and then suddenly flashed crimson as her Sharingan activated, mostly following Ino's motions as slammed her elbow down and struck Ino's leg. The kick struck the elbow and both girls winced at the impact, Ino swiftly slipping back as another pair of kunai slipped into her hands while Sasuke shook her arm for only a moment then glared back at Ino. "I told you before, you can't beat me," Sasuke stated simply, her spinning eyes narrowed into slits. "Maybe any other day," Ino said simply as she tightened her grip on her weapons and narrowed her eyes. "But today you're going to lose." "Foolish girl," Sasuke growled, sweeping up Ino's fallen kunai and throwing one then the other at Ino with a snarl. In response Ino threw one of her kunai, knocking the first kunai to the side, then ricocheting into the second. From that second ricochet, Sasuke was already moving and the launched kunai was caught by the hilt and she was running forward. In response, one more kunai slipped into Ino's free hand and she moved quickly, bringing her blades up to deflect Sasuke's slash. For a few precious moments, it seemed as though Sasuke's furious, precise slashes would wear through Ino's defenses, to crash through them before she cut the blonde down with her own kunai. Only, amidst that storm, Ino remained calm, using tight, efficient motions, deflecting the slashes instead of blocking. Small little cuts swelled here and there when she couldn't fully make a clean deflection in time to deflect the follow-up strike. But, despite the onslaught, Ino stared back into Sasuke's eyes with a cold, calm certainty that spoke volumes to the Sharingan gaze. Today, Sasuke wouldn't be the victor. Today, Sasuke would be the one to lose. Sasuke's rhythm faltered as that realization hit her, the sheer incredulity of Ino's confidence stalling her already slowing strikes. It was a mistake. Just as she promised, Ino struck, taking advantage of that falter, and slashing out towards the top of Sasuke's kneecap. Realization quickly relayed itself back down through Sasuke's limbs and her free hand shot down, knocking the attack down only an inch. An inch was enough to save the tendons attached to her kneecap as she twisted slightly enough to the side to prevent the blade from cutting into her flesh. It was not, however, enough to block the fist that slammed into the joint and forced her leg to buckle in a flash of pain. Ino bounced from the strike while Sasuke struggled to keep her grip on her confiscated kunai while Ino's strike slashed out. A thrust of the ring turned into an underhanded slash when deflected, a shift that forced Sasuke to block Ino's strike from her other hand with her unarmed fist. Bones cracked beneath the blunt strike of the kunai ring smashing into the back of her hand. Snarling, Sasuke slashed out, trying to force Ino back and rise out of her forced kneel at the same time. Ino refused her, taking a nasty cut along her arm as she locked up Sasuke's kunai and slammed her own knee into the side of Sasuke's raised one. Forced to kneel completely by the motion, Sasuke tried to dig the blade deeper into Ino's skin while the blonde cut into her own arm and twisted around to her back. Then Sasuke couldn't help but scream as she felt the slash of Ino's kunai cutting the tendons at the back of her ankles. The scream was short-lived as her slash rose up with a twist of her body and Ino slammed the ring of her kunai into the side of Sasuke's head. Spasming fingers lost their grip on her kunai and Sasuke's eyes flickered between black and crimson, though she refused to surrender so easily to unconsciousness. "Just stay down." Ino snarled as she smashed her fist into Sasuke's cheek, again, then again, as the crippled girl struggled to escape the blows as her broken hand rose up, trying in vain to shield her vulnerable head from the sharp, snapping blows. Releasing the hold she'd kept on Sasuke's other arm, she slammed her knee hard into Sasuke's ribs, then when the girl reflexively flinched her hands towards her side, she grabbed hold the back of Sasuke's head and smashed her face into her knee. Sasuke's head snapped back as the force of the blow finally drove her consciousness from her body and she went limp against Ino's grip. Panting softly, Ino glared at the downed girl, her eyes slits as she pushed her back and off of her, listening to the unconscious moans of pain falling out of her lips. Only taking a moment to catch her breath, she quickly secured her weapons, making sure that they were out of the Uchiha's potential reach. Grunting softly, she was suddenly very glad Anko had impressed an always-prepared mentality upon her. Emergency medical aid was rendered, both on herself and, reluctantly, upon the Uchiha. She then quickly secured her captive with an intricate series of knots. When she finished, she let out a sigh of relief and turned her attention towards where Naruto and the girls were engaged in their own respective battles. "Well, damn," Ino took a moment, staring down at the captive at her feet and slowly shaking her head as realization hit her. "I actually did it. What you did is what we want to know," a new voice cut in with a tired chill in it. "Because from where we're looking, it doesn't look good." Ino looked up with a start and then released a sigh of relief as she recognized the replacement proctor for the third exam standing there with another man with a scar across his face. Then, the rest of her mind quickly caught up with the situation she was in and she snapped to attention. Genin Ino Yamanaka, under command of Chunin Naruto Uzumaki, completing objective of halting the defection of Sasuke Uchiha to Hidden Sound and Orochimaru. Gunma paused a moment, his senbon twisting in his mouth as he caught the three fights still ongoing, all but one figure familiar to him as he could feel the sense of heavy bloodlust and demonic chakra in the air before grimly looking back Ino. "And your commander?" Ino's eyes narrowed at the unspoken question and she glared back at the man, dealing with the extraction team sent to aid the Uchiha's defection. "Has he?" Gunma started to ask, pondering how to phrase the question. "He is under control," Ino snapped back, before wincing slightly. Another wave of chakra flooded the air. "Just really pissed off." Nodding slightly, Gunma turned towards his companion. "Rado, go get the others. I'll make sure this doesn't get out of control." "Gotcha," Rado agreed with a nod before looking at Ino. "If what you say is true, good job, kid." And with that, Rado vanished in a swirl of leaves. Chapter 34. Tayuya twisted herself around the savaged swipes of Kin's attack, an angry grimace written upon her features. She hated being on the defensive. She hated the constant, direct pressure Kin was able to keep on her. She hated that insufferable, predatory smirk written upon Kin's face. Then she was flying, until she wasn't. The momentum of her forced flight bouncing off of the tree she hit and slamming back into her body. She arched in a silent scream of pain, refusing to let the sound gain life before she thrust forward. Panting softly, she glared up at where Kin was smirking at her, watching her as she crouched down on the ground like some predator watching her prey. And so far that's exactly what it had been. Kin was the predator and Tayuya was the prey. She hated it like nothing she'd ever encountered before. With Orochimaru, it was expected. With Sakan and Yukon it had been proven when they first met. The same with Kimimaro and that bastard Kabuto, too. Kin had been trash. Weak, unimportant, she had just been a pawn sent off to sacrifice. That was all she was ever supposed to be. Now, you wouldn't be running away, would you, Tayuya-chan? Kin clucked her tongue and shook her head as she grinned back at her. No, that won't do, not at all. Sanban shot out, lightning-fast needles that forced her to keep moving. They came from every direction, raining upon her from a growing swarm of smirking faces staring back at her. All of them identical, all of them bearing the same sadistic smirk she'd worn herself countless times. Now, that's not the face of a girl having fun. The Kins launched another wave of Sanban, forcing her back against a tree as the needles blossomed on either side of her. You used to tell me that cat and mouse was your favorite game. Come on, Mouse-chan. Don't tell me that changed. Growling, Tayuya saw red. She wasn't going to be the mouse. She was not the mouse. She was the goddamn tiger among the fucking sheep. Her fist slammed into Kin's face, sending the girl stumbling back with a snap. Then her head came up and she grinned, her split lip giving a grisly stain to her teeth. Well now, looks like thinks she has Mouse-chan has some claws after all. Tayuya stared for a moment, she couldn't help it, she was no Jirubu, but she knew how to throw a punch, and with her curse seal active. Then Kin's fist hit her own face and she was sent back, reeling as she could feel her nose crunching and cracking beneath the sudden pressure. Tears suddenly clouding her eyes, she moved, following the bleary form she could barely make out. Block, parry, block, kick. Feel the satisfying grunt as her knee found Kin's stomach. Then a fist hit her own gut and she stumbled back. Claws raked across her chest, the wounds burning like fire as she twisted forward and then raked her horns against Kin's own body. It wasn't her usual tactic, she'd never actually had an opponent get this close to her for this long without being intercepted by her doki or knocking her out. Not since she'd acquired her seal. Still, she could feel the resistance, the hiss of pain that left Kin's lips as close as she was. With a vicious growl, she scratched up, trying to rake her fingers across Kin's eyes. A moment later, she could feel the scraping of skin beneath her nails but knew she hadn't found her mark. Well, I guess you do have some claws after all, huh, Mouse-chan? Kin growled back, her anger laced with anticipation. Did you like the way mine felt earlier? How about I give you another taste? Bring it, trash, Tayuya spat back, spraying the blood gushing from her nose into Kin's face as she took advantage of the flinch to grab handfuls of Kin's hair and smash the curved back horn at the top of her head into Kin's face before kicking her away with a snarl. She couldn't make out exactly how Kin had reacted, her eyes still streaming with tears. Still, she could pull out a spare kunai and leap forward with a snarl. She couldn't make out exactly how Kin had reacted, her eyes still streaming with tears. Still, she could pull out a spare kunai and leap forward with a snarl. Viciously, she swiped at Kin's stomach, snarling softly when she felt the girl grab her wrist and viciously twist while roughly bending her wrist forward. Then she could feel the wet popping snap as her wrist fully snapped and the kunai fell from suddenly limp fingers as the sensation was lost in a spiking haze of pain. Gritting her teeth, she attempted to smash her knee up between Kin's legs, only it would seem Kin had beaten her to the punch as she felt hard knee smashing into the most sensitive part of her body. She screamed then, her legs reflectively clenching together as she doubled forward. Then she could feel a pair of hands grabbing her by her horns. Suddenly, she was being pulled, dragged, forward at a vicious speed before suddenly halting, face first in the trunk of a tree. Then she was pulled back and it was repeated. Then again. It was during the third that she finally succumbed to the darkening veil of unconsciousness. "Aw!" Kin snarled as she felt Tayuya finally go slack in her grip before she threw the bloodied, beaten girl to the ground, her cursed seal starting to recede back into her body. Grunting softly, she released her hold on the Kyubi chakra pulsing through her system and she felt the sudden rush of burning, aching pain rippling across her body. It was so easy to ignore it while under the effects of the demonic chakra, but now. Hissing softly, she found her way gingerly over towards where Tayuya had been forced to drop her kunai and retrieve the blade. Almost limping back to Tayuya's once more completely normal, albeit bloodied, form, she grabbed hold of the girl's hair and pulled her head back, baring her throat to the world. When she brought the blade down to the waiting flesh, a voice coughed politely nearby. "While I'm sure I can appreciate the sentiment, we prefer to take defeated enemy Nin caught this close to Konoha alive if possible," Gunma noted as he watched her neutrally. "We can get more information out of them that way." For a moment Kin seemed to ponder that statement, her eyes darting over him, noting the vague familiarity and the headband he wore before glancing around as her fingers tightened on the kunai, pressing it more tightly into Tayuya's throat. Noting Ino not too far away, she saw the blonde give the slightest nod of her head in confirmation. Slowly, reluctantly, she let her shoulder release some slight bit of their tension. She nodded her head and removed the kunai from Tayuya's throat. That scarred guy, Marino-san? Kin asked hopefully as she tightened her grip on Tayuya's hair, with her eyes darting everywhere but Gunma's face. Considering who you just caught is? You better damned well believe it, Gunma agreed with a nod. Good. Kin just dropped Tayuya's face back into the ground before starting to spin the kunai in a full rotation about her finger, catching it, before spinning it again in swift repetition. Don't suppose you have something to tie her up with? I'm sure we can find something. Shizen-san should be here shortly to see to your wounds, Gunma agreed as he reached into his vest and withdrew a scroll. A line of blood across its contents, and he had both a field medical kit and a set of restraints unsealed. You keep your restraints with your medical kit? Kin asked with a bemused quirk of her lips despite the pain she was feeling as she momentarily paused the nervous playing with her kunai as she peered desperately in the distance to try to make out how Naruto was doing. No, I keep medical supplies in my prisoner kit, he responded easily enough. More efficient that way. Namike-sama thought of it. Yonde-sama? Kin asked warily, her narrowed eyes flicking in the direction Naruto had gone as she clenched her fingers tightly about the kunai's grip, but said nothing else. Another story, for another day, Gunma stated. Now, hold still. I need to get those wounds cleaned properly or Shizen-san will give me something that'll have me in the bathroom for weeks. Kin snorted softly in agreement but, reluctantly allowed the man to go to work. Aw. Temari frowned as she continued to weave about Jirubu's strikes, though he had gotten significantly faster since he invoked his cursed seal fully. Twice he had attempted to invoke another earth ninjutsu technique, only both were primarily static defensive measures. In response, she'd either backed away, forcing him to abandon it and pursue her, or she'd gone around it. While she was doing well in holding him off, it had become a battle of attrition as she was exceptionally limited to the tools she had available to her. The fans had left Jirubu bloody and cut up, but he didn't seem to be stopping any time soon, which left her in a less than enviable position. You know, I'm pretty sure you won't really listen, but what the hell, Temari offered with a bland shrug of her shoulder. I'm pretty sure Naruto-sama would prefer for me to give you at least a shot at walking out of this without being utterly humiliated and crippled. Big talk for a girl who's barely done anything more than scratch me, Jirubu snapped back with a growl. You mean the girl that took away a lot of the functionality in your arm and you still haven't touched? Temari shot back with a sigh filled with boredom. I mean, really, you might have been able to do something against some of the more useless genin I've seen, but here, now? When he clenched up, his mouth opening for a retort, she slid forward again and slashed out once more into the wound she'd already opened up in his arm. His new skin made newer cuts harder to inflict, but what was already opened up was another matter entirely. As blood flashed across the razor edge, she twisted around another rage-fueled blow and slashed up into one of the wounds the earlier Naruto clone had opened up on his chest. Here and now, you're nothing but a beaten fool who doesn't realize he already lost, she answered her own question with a bored, cool voice. Jirubu bellowed violently as the pectoral muscles beneath the cut were further slashed beneath the flash of the fan. Fresh blood leaking down his chest, he attacked again, a surge of adrenaline powering his movements. She simply flipped back in response, her fan slashing up, cutting deep into another one of previous wounds the boy had taken. When he stumbled, she tilted her head to the side before noting clinically, "You keep this up and you're going to die, just wanting to make sure you realize that." "I won't," he said with a gritted growl, glaring back at Temari, who shrugged her shoulders with a bemused smirk on her lips. "Of course. I mean, it's not like you've had some of your most important muscles groups slashed up and you're leaking blood so fast you're already having trouble standing straight," she shot back, her fan snapping open for a moment, then snapping shut again as she pursed her lips. "Ah well, idiots will be idiots. Just be glad my brother isn't here. He would have been messy." Jirubu stared at her incredulously for a moment, watching as suddenly her fan started flicking around her wrists in a distracting, dazzling contortion of movements as she smirked at him and continued, "Do try to not to sound too pathetic when you're bleeding out, nay? It's really depressing to be reminded that you were so weak. You. He struggled with the words, swaying both with rage and weakness. "Bitch, yes, now, bye-bye," she agreed with a cheerful wave of her fan before Jirubu felt a smashing pain in the back of his neck and collapsed into unconsciousness. "Hello again, Proctor-san. Did you enjoy the show? Not as much as the last one you were in," Gunma said easily enough as he glanced down at the unconscious Jirubu. "Though your performance was better in this one." "Oh, Proctor-san. What would my master think of you saying such things about me?" Temari demurely hid her face behind her bloody fan and batted her lashes back at him. "Thinking such things? Why, watching me, studying me, I could feel those eyes on me the whole time. Making feel so very naughty. When he just gave her a bemused look and patiently asked, or? Huffing slightly, she snapped her fan shut and crossed her arms about her chest though she still smirked slightly. Or you were just waiting to see if I was going to become a damsel in distress, or if you needed to shove something hard and sharp into my back. You do realize I'm 15 years too old to really get flustered by the double ententes, right? Gunma noted with a smirk before shaking his head and sighing slightly. Damn if I don't know if I should be jealous of the brat or pity him. Now why would someone think they should be anything but absolutely, completely jealous of Master being able to have his way with this hot, flexible little body of mine? Temari asked as she batted her lashes and put on an expression of absolute innocence. The fact that you're a mocking, sadistic bitch probably plays a big part in it, Gunma stated simply with a smirk. Ah, you say the sweetest things, Proctor-san, she said with a vicious smirk. That's nice. Now, secure your captive, Gunma stated as he tossed her a scroll lazily. And since you're in such fine shape, you can clean his wounds while we wait for the medic to show up. Temari reflexively caught the scroll and glared at him as she muttered some unflattering things under her breath, but nonetheless went to work. Oh! Sakan and Yukon stared around them with a frown as they noted the number of clones surrounding them. Ringing around the ground, perched in the tree limbs, stuck to the trunks, they surrounded them from every direction with angry, focused eyes. With an absent motion, Sakan rubbed his hands against his stomach and narrowed his eyes in irritation. He could still remember the last clone he'd had to face. If each of these had the same capabilities. Don't let them escape, Naruto stated simply as he watched the pair with narrowed eyes and then readied himself, cocking his head to the side, crouching down, and watching them as his whole body tensed up. Sakan stared at Naruto for a moment before slowly beginning to chuckle, a chuckle that slowly devolved into a burning laughter. Escape, don't let us escape. You. He. Heh, hee ha 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 ha. Yukon glared at his brother and growled softly, this isn't the time for joking around. Or are you forgetting we're on a deadline? Well, fine, he already revealed himself, Sakan grumbled irritably. If you want it done with already, go and finish it and ruin the fun. I was planning to. Yukon snapped as he suddenly threw a smoke bomb down at his feet. If you think a little smoke is going to stop me, you're dead wrong, Naruto growled back as he took a deep breath, focusing on his breath, on the feel of wind chakra, then suddenly exhaled, fueling the breath that left his mouth with it. The wind that left his mouth was hardly enough to do any kind of damage to anyone, however that was hardly the intent as it dispersed the smoke into nothing but thin plumes that hid nothing. It worked quickly, efficiently. Only it revealed Yukon was no longer there. Heh, you should have just let your clones finish us off, Sakan chuckled as he leered back at Naruto. You probably would have won then. Now it's all over. Like hell it is. Naruto said with a growl before a voice spoke up right next to him. Heh, looking for me maybe? Yukon said from where his head was suddenly sprouting out of Naruto's own body. What the hell? Naruto tried to smash his elbow back into the attached head, only for it to way out of the way with a smirk as another hand snagged the extended elbow. Do you know why Orochimaru picked us? No, of course you don't, Yukon asked rhetorically with a smirking sneer. My abilities are uniquely suited for assassination, and in my level 2 state, my body can merge with yours, sharing my body with yours. The same proteins, same cells, the same chakra pathways, until I start tearing them apart. Yukon paused a moment before grinning viciously at Naruto. Shall I show you? You? Naruto snarled a moment before pausing as he recalled the words Jiraiya and Anko had informed him about Jinchuriki and demonic chakra. You dumb shit. Of all the reactions he could have, that was what the brothers had least expected. Seeing their confusion, Naruto grinned back at them. Let me guess, because you can manipulate your bodies like this, it's how you were healing earlier. Humph, and what, you think your little healing trick is going to save you? Sakan countered with a sneering smirk. Yukon's going to tear you apart faster than you can heal it back. Yeah, let's see about that, shall we? And suddenly Naruto growled as he was engulfed in a pulsing miasma of Kyuubi chakra. Sakan's smirk turned to a look of horror as Yukon suddenly began to scream and thrash as he separated himself away from Naruto as quickly as possible, writhing about on the ground. Portions of his skin began to darken, growing an angry red, before turning an ugly, rotting black. He thrashed wildly, twisting, convulsing, but more than anything, he simply screamed. What did you do to him? Sakan demanded as he grabbed hold of his brother's body and tried to force the body to integrate with his, even as his brother resisted. You know, the problem with sharing your body with someone, with connecting to their chakra system, is that you end up sharing their chakra, Naruto said, grimacing slightly as he couldn't just watch the way that Yukon slowly degraded. Sakan had managed to halfway force his brother back into his body before he felt it hit. The caustic, burning in his chakra, spreading, consuming through him. He stared back at Naruto, mouth opened wide, horrified as he felt himself falling towards the same fate as his brother. The thing is, without a body able to handle that chakra, without a seal to make it safe, harmonized to it, Naruto could feel the bile building up in the back of his throat as he stared at Sakan. Demonic chakra poisons and destroys normal chakra pathways. Then Sakan let loose a scream, mirroring his brother's. Naruto could only watch as they were literally consumed from their own chakra coils. Their screams filling the air, horrible, thrashing, writhing things. He fell to his knees and could feel the way his stomach quivered and its contents rose up his throat. "Don't look away," the voice was soft, stern as it filled the air and, for a moment, Naruto looked to see Genma standing there, arms crossed about his chest as he looked at the boy. "You need to see this, you need to understand it. This is what you did to them. Look." And he did. He watched as their bodies continued to thrash after their screams broke into wet gurgles. He continued to stare as they finally went still, their flesh half-eaten, the air filled with an acrid smell of rotting, burned flesh. Then he couldn't help but lean forward and empty the contents of his stomach. Again and again he retched, puking over and over, until he could feel the burning wretched taste of bile bursting past his lips. Coughing softly, he stared down at the pile of mess he'd made, taking ragged, panting breaths while spit dripped out of his mouth. "It's not pretty. It's not nice, it's not clean and it's not merciful," Genma said softly as he stood quietly behind the boy. "This is the kind of thing you only use when you absolutely have to. This battle the first time you've killed?" Shakily, Naruto nodded his head, feeling the urge to puke furthering as the dry heaves started to pulse through his body as he remembered the body of the first nin he'd killed at the start of the battle. "You won't like hearing it, but it does get easier. As much as it shouldn't, it does," Genma stated softly as he looked down at the boy. "Eventually, if you're not careful, it can become easier to do than not. That's when you know you have to stop. It needs to be hard. It needs to be something you only do if you have to. If not, that's where monsters come from." Naruto stared up at him, his mouth hanging open to summon up a scream of denial, a refusal, a damnation of what Genma had said, only to feel it die on his lips when he met the man's eyes. "It's something we all have to come to terms with," Genma said simply. "It's something we all have to face and we all have to come to terms with. If we don't, we have no place among shinobi. So, never forget this day. Never forget what you did, so you always have something to remind you." Numbly he nodded, shakily pushing himself up to his feet, before uneasily looking at the bodies, then back to Genma uncertainly. "What? We'll get a specialist team to get out here to deal with the remains," Genma said simply before nodding back towards the direction the girls had been fighting in. "Head back to your girls. They're all done." Naruto froze for a moment as he realized he'd completely forgotten about the girls, before looking towards Genma. "Are they?" "They're fine, even the Yamanaka," Genma agreed with a roll of his eyes and a light shove on Naruto's back. "Now, go, Shu. I've got to make sure these are watched until we can get someone out here to transport the remains safely. You get to escort the prisoners back to Konoha and get your first real taste of being a Chunin." "Ah?" Naruto blinked, staring at him in confusion. "But, wasn't this?" "Nope," Genma shook his head, just smirking back at the boy. "You still have to do the paperwork." "Paperwork?" Naruto repeated, staring back at him. "Yup, paperwork. The higher you get, the worse it becomes," Genma said with a smirk. "Have fun with that." "I think I hate you a little, Proctor-san," Naruto said sourly. "I know, it's a benefit of the job," Genma agreed with another smirk. "Oh." Naruto stared a moment at the trussed-up and bandaged figure of Sasuke, staring at the unconscious figure for a moment, before turning his attention to Ino. "You did that? What? You saying I'm not capable," she said defensively as she glared back at him as Shizune was applying medical chakra to her arm. "Were you always that mean or did crazy lady corrupt you?" he asked instead as he shifted and watched her warily. Ino opened her mouth to respond before shutting it and thinking for a moment. "You know? I don't know. I do yell at people a lot less these days. But I do stab them more." Naruto stared for a moment, before sighing and palming his face slightly. "Why are all the girls in my life violent maniacs?" "Hey!" Ino, Temari and Kin protested, before pausing, glancing at one another and shrugging a moment as they grudgingly admitted the point, to each other, at least. "I don't know, Naruto-kun. Are you a closet masochist, maybe?" Shizune asked innocently as she tilted her head to the side and smiled back at him. "Do I need to teach you about safe words and make sure you know about how to be tied up without doing any lingering damage?" Naruto stared at her, his mouth opened and jaw hanging for a moment, before sputtering out, "No. I'm not that kind of pervert. That's Kinchan." He paused a moment then continued, "And sunshine. Hey. I am not a masochist," Temari declared with a huff. "I simply like it rough." "Naruto-kun, are you saying there's something wrong with being willing to inflict a certain level of violence upon a situation?" Ino demanded sweetly as she batted her eyes at him. "It depends on how much of it is directed at me outside of training," Naruto responded back with a frown. "Outside of training?" Ino repeated as she slowly arched her own brow. "Well, yeah, it would be hard to train together if we didn't get violent, wouldn't it?" he asked in confusion. "You know, you just love to give me headaches trying to follow your train of thought, don't you, Naruto-kun?" Ino asked with a grumble before smiling a bit as Shizune released her arm, leaving her free to grab him by his vest and pull him down to her level. "And you know what? Are you going to kiss me again?" Naruto asked hesitantly as he stared at her wide-eyed and blinking. "Well, she does have a nice grip for it." "Very firm and assertive," Shizune agreed as she checked on first Kin, then Temari, before moving to treat the captives. "Just right to pull you into one whenever she's ready for it." "Hey, you just going to let her get away with it, Naruto-sama?" Temari asked, smiling innocently back at Naruto. "I mean, with everything else, letting her take charge from you? You'll start giving Kinchan here so many ideas about how easy you are." "Why would?" Kin started to say, suspiciously, before blinking a bit and suddenly smiling viciously. "Yeah, you're right, I mean, how can I expect him to handle me when he's letting the little princess wrap him about her finger?" "Hey, wait a minute." Ino sputtered as she stared back at the pair, eyes wide. "Of course, it is Naruto-sama," Kin continued with a melodramatic sight. "I bet he couldn't even grab her and kiss the hell out of her if he tried." Naruto stared at Kin for a moment, eyes narrowing. Yeah, he definitely isn't the type that could handle grabbing her by her hair, pressing her body back into him, his hand at the small of her back, rubbing lower as he brought her lips to his. Temari agreed even as she fought the urge to slowly lick her lips at the thought. Ino stared back at her, her mouth hanging open as her face flushed bright crimson. "They're trying to, bait me into kissing Ino like that, aren't they, Shizune-chan?" Naruto asked plainly as Kin and Temari both grinned broadly back at him. "Well, yes, and I'm very proud of you for recognizing it," Shizune agreed with a beaming smile before coming up behind him and whispering in his ear so only he could hear. "So shut up and do just what they told you and make them wish it was them you were kissing." And then she was smiling brightly again as she clapped her hands together. "Was there anything else?" Naruto blinked, stared at Shizune for a moment, looked at the still blushing Ino, and again felt the swelling disregard that had blossomed inside of him that morning bubbling up. With a tilt of his head, he suddenly grabbed hold of Ino's hair and pulled the girl close, her lips suddenly hovering about his own as she let out a startled eep. Then, as her eyes grew wide, she could feel the way her body was pressed into his hand catching the small of her back, her hips pressing into his as she caught his shoulders reflexively to steady herself. As Temari and Kin stared with open-mouthed disbelief and no small amount of envy, Naruto then pulled Ino into a kiss. They watched as Ino went stiff for only a moment in shocked disbelief before she relaxed into his arms and wrapped herself tightly into him. And when her eyes fell shut and the moan left her lips, they looked at one another and groaned as they almost simultaneously caught their faces in their palms. Shizune beamed happily, before the return to her work making sure that the captives were properly started on healing while she kept her chakra conserved before they got to the hospital. Again, she was once more thankful that Tsunade had decided to return to Konoha. Things were definitely much more interesting now than they had been on the road. "Aw." Tsunade sighed softly as the final Naruto clone dispersed, informing her that Naruto had successfully accomplished his mission and had in fact rendezvoused with Shizune's patrol team. With that news came the information that the Uchiha, along with 2 of Orochimaru's elites, had been successfully captured alive. In addition, the sound extraction team had suffered 2 fatal casualties, both apparently inflicted by Naruto. And because of how he'd eliminated the second, via demonic chakra infusion, Gunma Shiranui was remaining on site in order to keep the body secure until a proper retrieval team of their own could be dispatched to safely retrieve the tainted corpses. All this, after the earlier drama and stress of the tedious operation she'd been forced to give to one Rock Lee. Thankfully the boy had survived with promising potential for a full recovery. Guy had certainly been happy enough. Still, this was going to be a political mess. She just knew that somewhere, those bastard Uchiha were smirking at her as somehow, that the last of the Uchiha still managed to give her a massive headache. She was fairly certain that it wasn't intentional, simply genetic. The Uchiha had been bred to piss off Senju by their mere presence alone for centuries, after all. Now, however, she had to figure out just how to spin this, how to handle it. Unfortunately, her own knowledge of Konoha's internal politics was woefully outdated. That meant dealing with the He-sensei's former teammates. Joy. Chapter 35. Orochimaru frowned slightly as he leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowed into slits behind the heavy bandages wrapped about his face. They failed. It would appear so, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto agreed as he crossed his good arm about his chest and bowed to the man. Your orders? It is an irritating delay, Orochimaru stated simply as he leaned back, his eyes still slitted. So many things have been irritating lately. Kabuto remained silent as he watched and waited, the light catching his glasses just so it completely obscured his eyes. Kimimaro? Orochimaru asked simply as he arched a brow back at Kabuto. He was most distraught to learn that you'd been forced to take on a substandard new body, Kabuto said simply, his eyes unreadable. He almost took it upon himself to attempt to aid the sound for. Of course he did, Orochimaru stated simply, a dry amusement in his tone. And I'm sure you convinced him that it would be in his best interests to remain where he was. Yours, actually, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto stated simply. Of course, Orochimaru agreed, his eyes suddenly twinkling. And it would have nothing to do with the fact that you are now in need of a replacement for what your dear friend, Naruto-kun, took from you, It would be in your best interest for you to have as many capable individuals at your disposal as possible, Kabuto responded neutrally. In my current state, I am hardly at my most capable. And of course Kimimaro-kun just happened to offer up a replacement, Orochimaru agreed with a cold smirk growing over his lips. He was quite adamant that we act in your best interests, Orochimaru-sama. I believe he proclaimed his entire being willing sacrifice for your ambitions if need be, Kabuto stated blandly. I simply pointed out that I would not be at the peak of my ability to aid those ambitions due to the setback I encountered. And you were planning on seeing if you could make use of some of the techniques I developed for Shimura-san, Orochimaru noted with another smirk. My, so ruthless, Kabuto-kun. So manipulative. Whatever it takes to best serve, Kabuto said simply as he tilted his head to the side and studied Orochimaru for a moment. After all, I made the choice so long ago, did I not? So you did, Orochimaru agreed, chuckling again as he would frown slightly. Well, I suppose we'll have to wait and see exactly what happened with Sasuke-chan. If she was caught, then it will simply be a matter of finding the appropriate time to liberate her. If she wasn't, then it is still only a matter of time before she comes to me. And either way works out to your benefit, Kabuto stated with a quiet murmur. Orochimaru-sama. As long as we don't take too long in retrieving her, Orochimaru agreed with a smirk. Fortunately it shouldn't take me too terribly long to become familiar enough with this body to fetch her, either way. Of course, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto agreed with a simple nod of his head. Oh. Tsunade sat quietly, leaning back in her seat as she took a long, slow look, glancing between her teacher's former teammates before she lightly steepled her fingers together as she spoke. Would the respected elders please repeat what they just said? If they were intimidated by the woman before them, neither showed it in the slightest, but they were among the few remaining veterans of earliest shinobi wars. As much as she herself had seen, the two in front of her had seen even more. They had been trained by both her grandfather and her grand-uncle, and while they might respect her to a degree, she is still fresh to her position. I wish I could say that I did not misspeak, Hokage-sama, Koharu stated quietly as she stared unflinchingly back at Tsunade. However, the fact of the matter is, Hokage-sama, we fear exactly how Itachi Uchiha-san will react to the death of his little sister, Hamura finished for his teammate as he bowed his head quietly. And we are still firmly in his debt for the burden that was unfortunately placed upon him. And Sensei went along with this plan? Tsunade asked with a flat look as she stared back at the two of them. No, Koharu stated simply with a shake of her head. Another interested party approached Itachi-san and initiated the end of their coup. Sarutobi-sama was purposely kept unaware. Until after the blade had fallen, Tsunade stated with cold eyes boring back into the pair. Danzo. Neither responded to her words, letting the silence speak for itself. While I can understand the position you were in. There was a pause as she slowly leaned forward, her eyes locked upon them both, if only barely. The authority you held under Sarutobi-sama will not be extended any further. We accept this, Hamura stated softly as he bowed his head in acknowledgement. Will we be allowed to reclaim our honor? Tsunade stared at them both for a moment, lips pursed as she stared at them, temptation flashing across her eyes before she leaned back again. If Sensei did not feel that it would be an appropriate response when the affront was to him, then I will honor his decision. I will not be so forgiving. They nodded quietly in acceptance before Koharu asked simply, "And Shimura-san?" Her eyes narrowed only the barest fractions of an inch at that question before she tilted his head to the side. "He will be stepping away from any and all involvement in any armed force, shinobi, civilian or otherwise. Immediately." They looked at one another before looking back at Tsunade and nodding their heads in acceptance. Seeing this, Tsunade nodded slightly in turn, before looking back at the honored elders. Then what remains is to decide what is to be done with her. Koharu and Hamura looked at each other for a moment before looking back at Tsunade as Koharu spoke up. "There is always the solution that Sarutobi-sama implemented with the Kazekage's daughter. You want me to put an unstable, intelligent, highly trained and violent kunoichi into the care of a chunin who already has the responsibility to look after two formerly hostile nin," said kunoichi's former teammate, who was promoted over her, which, given her instability, would likely only antagonize her when she finds out, and whose girlfriend was the one responsible for apprehending her in a particularly vicious manner. Tsunade asked as she looked back at Koharu, "Is that the solution you would be referring to?" "I don't know, it could work," a new voice cut in, drawing their attention to the figure of Jiraiya perched in the window, watching them as he slowly sipped on a saucer of sake. "Potentially." "Potentially?" Tsunade looked at him, her eyes narrowed into slits. "And tell me, Jiraiya, how do you plan to potentially figure out how your little seal will interact with Orochimaru's?" "Testing," he said with a shrug of his shoulders and another sip of his sake. "I would humbly advise against using the Uchiha as a test subject, Hokage-sama, as it would be unpleasant should something prove incompatible," Hamura said quietly, his head bowed politely in turn. "Agreed," Tsunade said simply, even as she lightly tapped her finger upon the desk as she stared at the notes she'd been taking while the clones had relayed to her exactly what had occurred. "There is, however, another potential test subject." "One of Orochimaru's elite?" Jiraiya asked, the light strain of sarcasm in his voice hissing over his sake before he sipped again at his sake. "You do realize if we do this, Naruto will be stuck with them, correct? Wouldn't it be simple enough to dispose of them once process has been verified as viable, Hokage-sama?" Koharu asked with her head bowed. "Not in the long run," Tsunade stated as she continued tapping at her desk. "If we could do so without Naruto's knowledge, then it would be a simple matter. However, we don't have another Jinchuriki available to use to test this, and, from what I understand, it is a very involved process." The two elders glanced at each other before looking back at their Hokage, making no expression as they sat there, heads bowed. "You find objection to this?" Tsunade stated as she again steepled her fingers together. "We mean no offense, Hokage-sama, but to act with such favoritism towards a single ninja." Hamura spoke with a wary hesitance. "Oh? You mean like how favoritism has been shown every day in this village for the past 13 years? Tsunade asked curiously as she tilted her head to the side. "Would you please explain to me where the issue comes for showing favoritism to the ninja who stopped the unleashed might of Jinchuriki of the Ichibi without a single casualty? Something that was previously handled by the Yondaime Kazekage with nowhere near as low a casualty rate?" Tsunade paused as she would tilt her head to the side. "Or perhaps you're referring to showing favoritism towards of the Uzumaki, the clan considered the greatest ally of Konoha? The one whose clan symbol is still emblazoned on a Jounin's vest as a sign of the importance of our village? Or could it be you're objecting to showing favoritism to the son of Minato Namikaze, when the grandson of Hiruzen Sarutobi received infinitely more consideration?" Tsunade paused a moment before she slowly let an icy stare bore into the pair. "But perhaps the favoritism you're referring to is towards the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi when he spent his whole life ostracized and living as a pariah where his father's final wish was ignored, honored elders." Lesser men and women would have flinched beneath the accusation in those words, but the two elders merely bowed their heads quietly in acceptance of the words. "As you say, Hokage-sama. Would it be unreasonable to see about binding her to the Suna Jinchuriki then, as a compromise then? Since he will be appearing as part of the delegation for finalizing the terms of our new treaty?" Koharu asked with a quiet tone. "From what I understand, he would not be as adverse to the summary disposal. Unfortunately his seal is of highly inferior design," Jiraiya stated simply with a light grimace. "There's a chance because of it that the Ichibi could be unleashed by the process. I had already considered that possibility. And we do not have the current political clout to reasonably barter with Taki, and Mist is." Hamura murmured softly as his eyes took beneath his glasses. "I see. We have no choice then? We can kill the Uchiha as a traitor," Tsunade stated bluntly. "Which would be my preference. As you say, Hokage-sama, Koharu bowed her head quietly. If I might be so bold, there are rumors of a potential alliance between the Uzumaki and the Yamanaka. Tsunade paused a moment before pulling out a bottle of sake and suddenly smirking as she poured herself a saucer. I believe, given current circumstances, that it will not be unreasonable that there will be a revival of the Uzumaki. She paused, lifting up a saucer of sake to her lips as she gave them a look. However, there will be no encouragements until the girls are all of safe breeding age. May we humbly ask if the Hokage-sama is planning to make this a personal project? Hamura asked carefully. He. Tsunade started with a light chuckle before letting it grow into a maniacal peal of laughter that even Orochimaru would be jealous of. I think you can take that as a yes, Jiraiya noted dryly. Oh. It was some time later that again found the Hokage's office occupied. This time, instead of the two honored elders sitting in the seats before her, Naruto and his girls were on one side, while Gunma and Shizun were on the other, with Anko and Yugugo standing curiously behind them. Well, since Kakashi and Asuma are both on assignment, I'll begin. Earlier today, rookie genin Sasuke Uchiha attempted defection to the village of Hidden Sound and Orochimaru, Tsunade stated as she looked over the vague report of the incident she'd been able to put together. Her attempt was discovered by her teammate, rookie genin Sakura Haruno, who managed to alert their third teammate, rookie Chunin Naruto Uzumaki. While assuring the safety of Haruno, who had been injured by Uchiha, Uzumaki sent out two contingents of shadow clones, one group to pursue and either subdue or delay the Uchiha, the other to report the events. Upon learning of the situation from Haruno and ensuring she was stable enough, he created a third contingent of clones to watch her before pursuing the Uchiha with the enlisted aid of rookie genin Ino Yamanaka and his own personal retainers, designated spoils Kin and Temari. She paused there before glancing at Naruto and the three girls. Are there any discrepancies in this statement you wish to report? Naruto glanced for a moment towards Ino before slowly shaking his head towards Tsunade. No, but Sakura-chan might have more to add. Haruno will be debriefed at a later time once she's been fully cleared by the hospital, Tsunade said simply. You four then engaged in pursuit and eventually found the Uchiha rendezvousing with a group of Sound Nin approximately 2 miles due north of Konoha. Their identities are known, I understand? Kin stepped forward at that prompting and bowed her head. Yes, Hokage-sama. They are known as the Four Sounds, Jirubu of the South Gate, Kidumaru of the East Gate, Tayuya of the North Gate, and Sakan of the West Gate. Originally they were known as the Sound Five until Kimimaro was retired from their team for unknown reasons. Tsunade nodded her head as Kin stepped back and made a mark in her notes. And the previously dispatched Naruto clones had engaged the group the Uchiha and the Sound Nin, eliminating a summons, and damaging 2 of the Sound Nin. In your initial assault, Uzumaki eliminated one of the Sound Nin via Rasengan. Naruto shifted uncomfortably at the statement while all 4 of the senior Nin assembled gave him a variety of different looks. Most notable was the look of shock then rueful shaking of his head on Gunma's face. Anko merely smirked and Yugugo gave Naruto an unreadable expression. Shizun simply shot him a look of sympathetic understanding. Said Nin was identified as? Tsunade prompted as she looked at Naruto and Kin. He had 6 arms? Naruto glanced at Kin. Kidumaru, Kin supplied. Very well, Tsunade said with a nod of her head and another notation, then you split up to handle the remainder of the opposing forces. From what I understand, Yamanaka was the one who confronted the Uchiha? Yes, Hokage-sama, Ino said, feeling suddenly rather nervous as she shifted slightly in her place. And, from all reports, successfully subdued her. Tsunade stated simply with a nod of her head. Her? Naruto couldn't help but blurt out, staring at Tsunade. Naruto. Ino hissed and elbowed him lightly in the ribs. Weren't you paying attention? But. Sasuke, is a girl? Naruto repeated staring around as he looked around him and noted the bemused look on Anko's face. You knew. Brat, everyone knew but your generation. No one else would have been fooled by that weak little genjutsu, Anko stated with a smirk. Until recently her business was hers. She wanted to pretend to have an out tie instead of an innie, but that was her business. But, she's... Naruto stared, mouth hanging open. She saw me naked. Ino stared at him while the various adults all began to snort and chuckle in amusement at his reaction. Behind him, Temari and Kin smirked at one another. Tsunade, however, merely palmed her face in her hand and sighed. Can we please get back to the debriefing now? Tsunade asked with a slight hint of annoyance in her voice. You can talk about the Uchiha's lechery later. Of course, Tsunade-sama. We'll leave those thoughts about how the Uchiha obviously lusted after Naruto-kun's body in our heads where they belong, Shizune agreed, smiling innocently back at her master. Naruto went pale at the words, staring straight ahead, a slight trickle of sweat trailing down the side of his face. Thank you so much, Shizune, Tsunade stated sarcastically before looking back at Ino. During your fight, you cracked multiple bones in the Uchiha's body, specifically, her hands and ribs. On top of that you slashed the tendons in the back of her ankles and concussed her. Does that sound accurate? Yes? Ino offered hesitantly. I can confirm those are the injuries I documented the Uchiha was suffering from, Tsunade-sama, Shizune agreed with a nod of her head before sighing sadly. I'm afraid I was unable to sufficiently repair her tendons. I'm afraid that she'll have to wear heels wherever she's lead around. I can't express the full depths of how I feel about the situation. Duly noted, Tsunade stated dryly as she lightly gave her apprentice a look before looking back at Ino. Why were you the one to confront the Uchiha? Naruto started to speak up, only to be silenced by the feel of Ino's heel digging into his foot as she took a deep breath before speaking. The Uchiha was visibly exhausted and nowhere near top form. I was fresh, I had a decent understanding of my skills compared to hers and I knew that Orochimaru wouldn't have sent weak Nin to secure her. The Uchiha was the weakest of the enemy combatants and I was the weakest among our squad. I was confident that even if I failed to defeat the Uchiha myself, I could disable her enough to make capture viable when one of the others finished with their opponents. I see, Tsunade said with a vague nod of her head before looking to Naruto. Chunin Uzumaki, why did you leave the task of retrieving the target of your impromptu mission to Yamanaka? Huh? Why wouldn't I? I mean, yeah, I wanted to smash Sasuke's face in for what she did to Sakura-chan, but I knew Ino could handle it with Sasuke like that. Naruto scratched his chin in confusion. I mean, that's what you've got to do when you split up a team, right? Trust your comrades can handle it? And if she had failed? Tsunade asked bluntly. Naruto glanced nervously towards Ino before looking pleadingly at Tsunade, who only gave him a look, forcing him to admit, I had a few clones watching the fight. Tsunade nodded in satisfaction at that. Good. Your abilities with the shadow clone technique give you a unique ability to be involved in multiple aspects of a mission. I suggest you remember to keep making use of it. Ah, right, Grand Dash, he began to answer before trickle of killing intent and a glare quickly forced him to correct himself. Hokage-sama? Better, she agreed with a grunt. From what I understand your two spoils then each engaged one of the remaining enemy Nin, designated the sound for. Kin looked towards Naruto questioningly, who stared at her for a moment in confusion before realizing she was actually waiting for his permission to speak and gave a quick nod of his head. Yes, Hokage-sama. I engaged Tayuya of the North Gate and Temari engaged Jirubu of the South Gate, Kin stated simply as she looked straight ahead towards the Hokage. When I finished with Tayuya, Jounin-san intervened to convey the preference of a live prisoner over a dead one, with the relative distance from Konoha. I can confirm her statement, Genma agreed with a nod of his head. I gave basic medical attention and secured the prisoner before I then helped Temari-san subdue her opponent without having to resort to more severe damage that would have left him less viable for interrogation. Temari shrugged a bit, I'm limited on what I can do without a battle fan, otherwise I would have crushed him straight from the start. Which leaves Sakan of the West Gate fighting Uzumaki, Tsunade stated as she again turned her attention to Naruto. Sakan and Yukon, Naruto corrected after a moment as he shifted a bit, the memories of their final moments suddenly pounding down into his mind. There were two of them. They shared the same body except when they didn't. They could do something with their bodies, their cells, heal themselves and also get into other people's bodies. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at his statement, I see. And how did you defeat them? The second one, Yukon, after they did that freaky grow horns and look all crazy thing, got into my body, and was talking about ripping me apart from the inside, Naruto said slowly, before looking away and down towards the ground. So, I used some of the Kyuubi chakra. Tsunade's eyes flicked towards Ino, who showed no surprise at the statement and whose hand found Naruto's and gave it a subtle squeeze of affirmation. She watched as Naruto almost seemed to pull away from that contact for a moment before gently squeezing back and continuing, he started screaming and separated from my body. The first one, Sakan, yelled at me, then I guess tried to pull him into his body to save him. Naruto paused a moment and then lifted his head and looked into Tsunade's eyes, that's when he started screaming with him. That's when Proctor-san showed up and told me I needed to watch. So, I watched. I watched them die. And it was horrible. Very well, Tsunade stated softly and nodded her head in understanding. Specialist Shiranui, do you have anything to add? They did good, Genma stated with a laconic shrug of his shoulders. Not much else I can say. They each took on a specific section of the mission and completed them all successfully. A bit more ruthlessness in some cases than I'm used to for brats, but, considering the circumstances of who they are, understandable. Though someone needs to get sunshine, there's some more variety to her skill set. Damn it, another one? Temari hissed with a grumble of distaste as her nickname was mentioned by Gunma. Specialist Mitarashi, I understand you've been personally overseeing Yamanaka's training along with Operative Yuzuki? Tsunade turned her attention to Enko and Yugugo, her brow arched up in question. With the approval of her Jounin instructor, Asuma Sarutobi? Yes, Hokage-sama, Enko agreed with a nod and a proud grin and a nod of her head. Very well, Tsunade nodded her head. Yamanaka is hereby transferred from Team 10 to Specialist Mitarashi's direct command. Her training will continue under Operative Yuzuki, barring availability for missions. Ino Yamanaka is hereby granted a probationary field promotion to the rank of Chunin, pending full review in 2 months' time. Any objections? Both Enko and Ino's jaws dropped as they stared at Tsunade, their eyes the size of saucers as Ino found her voice first. But, what about Shikamaru, Chuji, and Team 10? Team 7 is being fully disbanded, Tsunade stated simply. Obviously Sasuke Uchiha will not be returning to the ranks of active ninja. Given the situation, Kakashi Hataki's duties as an instructor are suspended pending full investigation. As such, Sakura Haruno will be joining Team 10 while Naruto Uzumaki will be serving apprenticeship to Jiraiya. That sounds appropriate, Yugugo noted with a nod of her head, before lightly tapping her chin thoughtfully. We still get to play with Uzumaki-kun, though, don't we? Tsunade stared at her for a moment. Play? Cut my clothes to ribbons while I'm still in them, Naruto answered as he stared dazedly ahead before staring at Tsunade. But, Team 7. Sakura-chan. The Uchiha destroyed your team, Tsunade stated simply as she shook her head. I won't have another Sannin on my hands. We have enough issues from the originals as is. You're a Sannin, Naruto muttered petulantly. Hence why I know what I'm talking about, she stated with a flat finality and a glare. Your apprenticeship to Jiraiya was already assured. Did you really think you were still going to be on Team 7 after your promotion and that? Yes, Naruto said, still visibly in a daze. Well, now you know better, she stated firmly. Will Haruno be allowed to continue her training with TNI? Enko asked as she finally found her voice again. I kinda put a lot of effort into that. I see no reason to discontinue that state of affairs, Tsunade stated simply. Now, Shizune, please escort everyone but Uzumaki out of my office. Of course, Hokage-sama, Shizune bowed her head and then carefully guided everyone but Naruto out of the office, Ino, Kin and Temari all showing a great deal of reluctance in leaving his side. Once it was just the two of them, Tsunade pointed to one of the chairs, take a seat, brat. We need to have a talk. Oh. Ino stumbled home with a look of dazed shock glossing over her eyes as she found herself collapsing at her kitchen table and staring ahead. Had an eventful day, princess? Inoichi asked with a smile on his face as he settled into a seat at the table himself. Sasuke went traitor, Ino stated tonelessly. I was on the retrieval team. Inoichi froze in place before looking quickly over her. Are you all right, sweetheart? I'm fine, Ino stated as she continued to stare ahead before absently commenting. I was the one who fought her. Her? Inoichi asked warily as stared back at Ino. Sasuke, she said dully. She is exhausted, worn out and at her limit. But I still beat her. Messed her up, in fact. She hurt Sakura. I slashed the tendons in her ankles. Hit her a couple of times, she wouldn't go down, so I smashed her ribs and then smashed her face into my knee. Inoichi nodded slowly as he waited for her to continue. I kissed Naruto, Ino stated as well, staring forward. Full on the lips. He took a deep, sharp breath, and focused on keeping himself calm. With tongue. For a moment, he stared at her, before standing up, I'll go get your mother. She nodded simply still staring ahead, before she spoke up as he walked away, oh, and I got promoted. Probationary. And I've been moved off of Team 10 to an apprenticeship under Anko. And the sake, Inoichi added as he rubbed his face, struggling against the urge to groan out loud. Warm, please, Ino said faintly, causing Inoichi to open his mouth to rebuke her, only to let it click shut when he remembered what all she'd told him. It was several moments later that Ino found her mother stepping into the kitchen with a bemused look on her face. Your father said you needed to talk to me? I take it this is about Naruto-kun? You know I thought I knew things this morning. I was Ino Yamanaka, genin of Konoha, member of Team 10, who needed to apologize to her potential boyfriend for being an idiot, Ino stated dully. And now, her mother asked curiously as she took a seat across from her unusually subdued daughter. Now, I'm Ino Yamanaka, probationary Chunin of Konoha, apprentice to Enko Mitarashi, girlfriend to Naruto Uzumaki, Chunin and Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Ino answered as she continued to stare blankly forward. The girl who beat Sasuke Uchiha unconscious, who she thought was a guy and used to have a crush on. Ah, I see, her mother agreed with a nod of her head. That is a lot to take in. I understand you also kissed your new boyfriend? I believe your father mentioned something about tongue? Ino could hear the arch of her mother's brow in her tone, but she barely reacted to it as she nodded her head. Yeah, and it was really good too. Even better when he kissed me later. Ah, young love, her mother agreed with a nod of her head and a smile. So, he told you about the Kyuubi? And you found out about Uchiha-san's true gender? She went traitor and we dragged her back, Ino agreed with a nod. Naruto told me about the Kyuubi before we got to the fight. I hope you understand how much trust he's putting in you then, her mother stated with a nod, before suddenly crossing her arms about her chest. Now, what's this I hear about sake? I've had a really long day. Ino asked hopefully. And I made Chunin? Probationary according to you, her mother countered back. That's gotta count for something, she argued back. You can have either the sake or free rein to make out with your boyfriend but you don't get both, her mother stated simply and arched a brow back at her. Damn it, Ino cursed softly and glared just a bit at her mother. You don't play fair. I'm your mother, I stopped playing fair the moment I knew I was pregnant with you. Chapter 36. There was a brief silence in the air as Tsunade leaned back in her chair before she spoke. Jiraiya, get in here and stop eavesdropping. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, before suddenly the air rippled and distorted and Jiraiya suddenly appeared leaning against the wall. You knew I was going to be here anyway, so I would hardly call it eavesdropping. Take off the hat already, it's just us and the brat. I don't remember you talking to Sensei that way, Tsunade stated with narrowed eyes as she glared slightly at him. I never saw Sensei puke all over themselves the first time he got drunk, he countered back with a slight smirk. And you didn't see how I talked to him after you left. She glared for only a moment at him before shaking her head. Moving on, take a seat, brat. Naruto glanced warily between her and Jiraiya. Take the seat, brat, you'll need it, Jiraiya advised with a nod towards the seat in front of the Hokage's desk. Warily he took a seat, again keeping his eyes bouncing between them. What's going on? There were issues regarding how we could properly handle your former teammate, she said simply as she leaned back in her chair, her hands pressing together, index fingers paired together and lightly tapping her lower lip. As such, neither of the typical solutions are ideal. That's an understatement, Jiraiya stated with a snort, gaining a questioning look from Naruto. There were things going on that weren't really what they seemed to be, brat. You mean like Kakashi's whole underneath the underneath thing? Naruto asked, perking up slightly. Yes, Tsunade stated simply, cutting off anything Jiraiya could say in response. Because of it the Uchiha has to have certain considerations taken in regards to her. She's not going to get away with it, is she? Naruto asked with a frown, his eyes narrowing into slits. She hurt Sakura-chan. There's no way she can just get away with that. She's not going to be a ninja again, no matter what, Tsunade assured him, nor will she go free. That's not in the cards. Then what? And why am I here? Naruto suddenly felt an itching little sensation in the back of his head, one that was telling him that there was something he really should be remembering. Something very, very important to the current situation. I suggested a compromise, Jiraiya stated simply, his lips twitching just a bit. The alarm bells were screaming now as he stared back at the smirking man who stood in front of him, arms crossed about his chest, before he turned toward Tsunade. After he said that, can I just say no? You could, Tsunade agreed with a nod as she lightly tapped her lips. You'd be potentially endangering the entire village, but you can refuse. Wait, what? Naruto demanded as he straightened up straight. Well, not only will we have to deal with the repercussions of either killing or imprisoning the traitor, she said blandly as she glanced out through her window to the village behind her, but we'd also have to deal with the loss of prestige at no longer having the Uchiha available to us. After the invasion there were those who thought it would be proof that the ninja of the leaf had grown soft, had become easy targets. But, he protested as the gears started to grind in his head. That's not fair. That's life, brat, Jiraiya stated blandly. Sometimes you have to do the best you can with the crap hand you're dealt. Damn it, what do I have to do? Naruto glared slightly as he slumped back and glowered back at them. Don't slouch, it's bad posture, Tsunade stated absently as she slowly flipped through a folder in front of her before looking back at him. It's simple. We need you to help attempt the effectiveness of Jiraiya seal against those created by Orochimaru. Starting with this Tayuya and, if effective, moving on to the Uchiha. Naruto stared at her, his mouth hanging open, before he practically shouted out, "What?" "I don't believe I need to repeat myself," Tsunade stated simply as she continued to glance through her folder. "Upon proven effectiveness of the seal on sound for member Tayuya, you'll repeat the procedure. A shame we couldn't get you a nice brunette, then you'd have a full spread of variety," Jiraiya noted sadly before sighing melodramatically. "Alas, you'll just have to settle for 2 blondes, 2 raven hairs and a red head." But, Naruto's eyes were wide as he stared back at them. "Ino-chan will kill me. Kin-chan will kill me. And Sunshine?" Jiraiya asked with a bemused twinkle in his eyes. "She'll laugh her ass off," Naruto said blandly as his shoulders slumped. "Women love a man that can make them laugh," Jiraiya noted with an innocent smile. "You're telling them, Granny," Naruto stated defiantly as he crossed his arms about his chest. "Oh? I am," she asked as she simply arched a brow and gave him a flat look. "Yes, because no way they'll believe me if I tell them," Naruto agreed, not backing down in the slightest. "I could tell them," Jiraiya offered, the innocent smile he wore only growing in size. "If he's going to, I refuse," Naruto stated flatly, not even looking at him. "Understandable," Tsunade agreed, unable to stop the small smirk that cracked her lips at the comment. "I suppose I can inform your girlfriend and your spoils that you are taking on another pair of spoils, despite the fact that you already have them." "That's totally not what's going on and you know it," Naruto declared with a glare. "You're forcing me into this." "It's all about presentation," Tsunade stated simply as she arched a brow. "If you have a problem with it, you can always just tell them yourself." Naruto glared at her in response as he crossed his arms about his chest. "Well? You're all evil. Every last one of you," Naruto stated firmly with a nod of his head and another glare. "Kid, you don't know the half of it," Jiraiya said with a chuckle, reaching down and lightly ruffling Naruto's hair. "Evil," he repeated petulantly. As Naruto sulked in his seat, Tsunade took a moment to stare at the contents of one of the other folders in front of her. She'd followed a whim and a hunch. The results stared back at her from the page in front of her. It wouldn't change the course of action, but hopefully it would make it more acceptable. She glanced again towards Naruto before carefully closing the folder and settling forward and watching as Jiraiya amused himself at the boy's expense. Hope, after all, sprung eternal. Aw. Beyond the office, as Ino walked off in a daze along with a smirking Anko and a visibly bemused Yugugo, Temari and Kin leaned against the wall standing next to one another, both staring towards the door to the Hokage's office. "What do you think they're talking about?" Kin asked after a few minutes of silence when it became obvious that Naruto would not immediately reappear. Well, either us, or something we won't like," Temari noted with a shrug of her shoulders. "Maybe even both." "But, we just kicked ass," Kin protested quickly. "We took down some of Orochimaru's elites. We accomplished the mission. And now, what?" Temari countered back as she pulled out one of her fans and began to twist it about her wrist with a pulse of her chakra. "What happens from here? What happens to the Uchiha?" "Simple. She's one of the 2 last Uchiha," Temari countered back as she snapped her fan back into her palm. "So? She's already run to Orochimaru once, she'll just try to do it again if they let her live. Do you think they'll just let him slither into her body and get her Sharingan?" Kin responded irritably as she tapped her finger against the wall. Temari stared at her for a moment, before slowly rubbing her face lightly. "Okay, right, you didn't grow up in a real ninja village." Kin opened her mouth to object, before it clicked shut and she glared lightly back at her. "So? What about it?" "There are 3 clan names that made the shinobi world tremble. They are some of the bigger reasons that Konoha has remained as the village. The one all the other major villages look at with respect, envy, jealousy and fear. Uchiha is one of those names. If Konoha no longer has the blood of that clan inside its walls." She trailed off, shrugging her shoulders. "It's not a fatal or even a crippling blow, but it is still a pretty big blow to their reputation." "Wait, you can't possibly mean." Kin stared at her, before quickly shaking her head. He wouldn't. I mean, she just went traitor. She attacked his other teammate. "So?" Gunma cut in, chuckling in amusement where he watched the pair, Sunban twisting between his lips. Weight of benefits against consequences. Helping Konoha save face and maintain the appearance of its strength, against his discomfort. "But," Kin started to protest immediately, "Trey." When she paused and shifted slightly in uncomfortable realization, Gunma smirked quietly back at her. "Traitors should be killed?" Kin glowered back at him, crossing her arms about her chest and bowing her head towards her chest at Technically, to Konoha, you're a defector, not a traitor, Temari stated helpfully as she smirked back at Kin. And weren't you going to be killed? I don't need you making his point for him, Kin snapped back with a glare. This doesn't bother you at all? The whole situation bothers me, Temari stated pointedly as she flicked her collar. However, unlike you and the Uchiha, I'm not a traitor. Nope, you're just such a ray of sunshine that went along with a plot to betray your allies and commit mass slaughter of civilians, Gunma noted with a slight pursing of his lips. That was sound, not us, Temari growled back, her eyes narrowing slightly. We don't slaughter civilians like that. Right, because we all know unleashing a bijou in the middle of a village isn't going to cause massive civilian casualties, Gunma stated with a flat look straight into her eyes. She flinched at that, her eyes falling as she couldn't meet his stare. Thought so, Gunma nodded his head as he twisted the sunban lightly between his lips. Just figured I'd remind you, to us, you're not really much better. She at least accepts it, best you do the same. Plus, righteous indignation is better left to the professionals, Shizun stated seriously as she looked at the pair. You can talk to Shizun-san if you want to get the lessons and licensing, Gunma agreed with a nod. I'm sure she'll be happy to make sure you're properly trained. Now, Shiranui-san, you wouldn't be implying something, now would you? Shizun asked sweetly as fixed smile plastered across her lips. Temari and Kin glanced at each other before the sound of the office door opening reached them and they saw their master walking out of the Hokage's office, shoulders slumped and head bowed. So, that bad, huh? Temari noted as she lightly squinted at Naruto, pushing down the feelings of guilt and unease she was feeling. Guess, she tell you that you have to take the Uchiha as a spoil too? His shoulders immediately slumped even further as his chin fell onto his chest. Guess so, she stated as Kin's eyes narrowed in outrage. And the other one? The one Kinchan fought, he stated blandly. What? Kin demanded, her eyes growing the size of saucers, before she whirled around and pointed a bemused Gunma. This is all your fault. Keep telling yourself that, Gunma chuckled as his sunban dangled from his lips with a light glint to his eyes. Now, Gunma-kun, no need to be so modest, Shizun stated as she looked at the man with narrowed eyes. Modest, Shizun-san? Gunma arched a brow. But weren't you the mission leader for our little rendezvous? You do realize I know it's Granny and the super pervert's fault, right? Naruto stated flatly as he gave the pair a glare before looking around. Where's Ino-chan? She went off with Anko and Yugugo. I think she's still in shock, Gunma noted with a chuckle as he reached down and ruffled Naruto's hair. Congrats by the way, kid. Oh, before I forget? Tsunade's voice cut in from the office, Sunshine's brothers will be here shortly to pick up the new treaty for ratification. Shizun, take the brat and the girls to go meet them. Kankuro and Gaara? But, Temari's eyes widened and she took a step back, but, wait, do they know about? And there? And we've got to? Sucks to be you, kid, Gunma noted with a chuckle before he turned and waved over his shoulder. Have fun meeting Sunshine's family. And suddenly so glad I'm an orphan, Kin muttered, before suddenly freezing in place as a realization hit her. Wait, isn't your brother an insane, murderous, and incredibly powerful psychopath? Yes, Temari agreed with a nod. He's not that bad, Naruto protested, gaining a pair of incredulous looks. He's not. And isn't the Uchiha's brother an insane, murderous ninja who's powerful enough to fight the Sannin? Kin continued as she gave them both a look. Yes? Naruto agreed cautiously. I mean he and Fish Guy did run away, but... S-ranked missing Nin, Kin stated as she stared at Naruto for a moment. When did this thing turn into a damn death sentence? We're not going to die, Kin-chan, Naruto said irritably as he gave her a look. How the hell can you say that? Kin demanded. Do you not get how many people are going to want to kill us? How many insane and incredibly powerful ninja will want us dead? And we'll just get strong enough to kick all their asses and show them that we're not gonna be messed with, he said simply. Come on, let's go see Gaara and what's his name already. But, Kin protested, even as she let him grab hold of her wrist and lightly start pulling her along. That's not how it's supposed to work. Well, he's refused to do things how they were supposed to so far, so why change what works now? Temari muttered with a light daze in her voice as she robotically followed after the pair. Oh. Sasuke sat on cold stone, her aching body practically naked beneath the thin, rough prisoner's smock hanging from her shoulders. She could feel the heavy collar at her throat, chains running perhaps a foot from it to the matching cuffs at her wrists and the steel bar that connected them one to the other while keeping her hands far apart. From it another chain ran down, finding a matching bar leading to similar cuffs on her ankles. Not that it mattered, even if she was free of them, she still remembered the slash against the back of her heels and the pain when she tried to stand. It was fitting really. A constant reminder of her betrayal. She had lost. Again she had lost everything she had left that had mattered to her, that might have mattered to her. This time, though, because she'd thrown them all away, all towards the goal she'd coveted above all else. Now revenge was lost as well. At best she'd be executed. She hoped for a swift death, but it was rather unlikely. At worst, she'd be thrown somewhere deep and dark and kept there, rotting and alone as they made sure she never saw the light of day and denied her the escape of death. They'd break her, destroy her, and then leave her to rot to the point where even if somehow she did manage to escape, she'd never be a threat again. And the cold, hard truth was it was all her fault. It had been her failure, her weakness. She had lost to Ino of all people. The only thing that would have been worse would have been losing to Sakura. How could she have fooled herself into thinking she could ever have a chance of fighting him? She let out a bitter, hollow chuckle as she closed her eyes and curled her body back into itself just enough to allow her to rest her head back against the cold stone within the confines of the chains. Why bother trying to escape? There was no point to it anymore. There was no point to anything. An angry throb of pain dug into her neck from the cursed seal and another flood of thick, sullen emotion poured through her veins. It was funny how easy it had been to ignore the way it felt like oily filth when it twined so easily with her anger, her hatred. It was even funnier how obvious it became with the empty lack of emotion that filled her. So she sat there, alone save for the empty silence surrounding her, and the whispering insistence in her head that she had made the most horrible mistake she ever could. As the time wore on, she found it harder and harder to find herself coming up with arguments against it. Tayuya felt a wild panic swell up from the primal depths of her soul when she blearily awoke to find herself strapped naked and defenseless to broad metal table in a sterile white room. No one in sound ever wanted to wake up like this. Ever. She'd done so once before, just after her experience with Orochimaru applying his curse seal to her body. She hadn't been expected to survive, apparently. It was only by a flight of whim and fancy that she'd been released long enough to prove her worth to be a member of the Sound for that moved her dissection until after he had finished autopsying the bodies of the failures. It had been a constant reminder to her to push herself beyond anything but a position as a valuable member of his elite. This time, though, it wasn't right. It was too sterile, too clean, too bright. Orochimaru always seemed to want to make the shadows loom with what possible horrors they could hold just beyond what you could see, filling the air with the stale scent of fear. And somehow that terrified her more than she imagined possible. "Ah, awake I see," a coolly detached voice noted from behind. When she strained her neck to catch a glimpse of the source of the voice, she finally noted the thick tube-like gag strapped into her mouth, forcing her jaws almost to the limit they'd opened to. "I'm sure you've probably been in a situation like this before, though probably something darker, I'd imagine. Plenty of deep shadows, things you could almost see and the like," the voice continued, almost sounding bored from its position just beyond her line of sight. He always did prefer to play it up even more than Jiraiya. Tayuya's eyes widened as suddenly the heavy click of heels reached her ears and she could feel the pit in her stomach sink somehow even deeper. Personally, I always thought he was too impatient for anything else. Too eager for results, not willing to take the time to actually follow all the procedures I taught him, Tsunade noted blandly as she studied the girl. "I mean, really, a combat enhancement that's only viable on 10% of the population and fatal to the rest? Most of them were probably easily correctable." She wasn't sure which scared her more. Either the fact that as soon as Orochimaru found out she'd been captured, her dissection was assured, or the legendary medic who had likely taught Orochimaru a great deal of his own knowledge of medical procedure looking at her like she was a particularly vile boil that needed to be lanced. "Tayuya, North Gate of the Sound 4. Summoning and Genjutsu Specialist," Tsunade noted blandly as she studied the girl with a slight tilt to her head and a clinical detachment to her voice. One of the only two surviving members of the failed extraction team for Sasuke Uchiha. Tayuya could feel her heart sinking the longer she listened to the woman's words as the words she was describing sank into her head. Failed extraction. If they had failed, then she was the walking dead. It was all a matter of how painful it would be now. If she was telling the truth. As if reading her mind, Tsunade nodded slightly as she walked over and Tayuya could feel the gag being at least temporarily removed before she stepped back into sight again. "Well, at least you don't seem to be completely inept when it comes to individual thought like most of his pets. Most of them would either deny it entirely or believe it completely without doubt. At least that's what information Kin's told us. You do remember Kin, don't you?" Anger and fear roared in her veins as she remembered the girl in question. First as the weak little girl who'd managed to show just enough ability to get put on a team with Zaku and Dosu, but showed little potential for going any further. Then there was the sadistic, fanged smile and the gleaming, demonic, blood-red eyes and that feeling of soul-wrenching fear pouring into her. I see you do, Tsunade continued with another, vague tilt of her head before she slowly opened up a folder and glanced through its contents. She also remembers you quite well. I think she already expressed the sentiment to you rather adequately, based on the medical reports on the condition you were in when you were captured. So, what, is this the part where you start to fucking cut me open and make me scream? Tayuya demanded as she glared back at Tsunade. Dissect me while I'm still fucking alive like Orochimaru-sama likes to do to people that piss him off? Why bother? Tsunade asked with a bored arch of her brow. There would be little point to it and torture is notoriously unreliable, after all. Ibiki-san, you have heard of him, haven't you? Marino Ibiki-san? He's developed quite the reputation, after all. He can tell you firsthand just how unreliable such methods are. I ain't talking, bitch, she snapped back with more anger than she felt as she refused to look at the blonde woman in front of her. Do your fucking worst. Really? There was the light sound of the folder shutting before Tayuya felt the lightest touch of a finger touching upon her jaw and a light touch that somehow forced her head to tilt to the look back up at her captor with the apparent lightest of efforts. You see, it's things like that get little girls like you into trouble. You use your anger as a shield, focus on it, spitting acid and vitriol out like they'll make you look stronger than you really are. Casually she then lightly trailed her finger down Tayuya's throat, past the jugular, slowly along the center of her body. You think that it makes you tough, we'll keep you safe. Just below Tayuya's belly button, she pressed forward, just slightly, and suddenly the girl's world exploded into a sea of molten agony as it felt as if every nerve in her abdomen convulsed in one single rippling wave of pain. She screamed, helpless and terrified as the tears rolled down her cheeks and her body bucked and writhed as much as it could beneath that still, steady, impassive gaze staring down back at her. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pain suddenly cut off into a spasmodic ripple of muscles settling back into place. For future reference, when you're faced with someone who is considered the foremost medical expert in the entire world, one whom even your precious little snake master and his pets acknowledge as knowing more than they do, being able to do things they can't, telling them to do their worst is a very, very foolish thing, Tsunade stated simple as she picked up the folder and flipped through it again. They know exactly how far they can take your body before your mind starts to crack. They know exactly how short of the time you need to recover and they can and will put your body back in pristine order, just to repeat as necessary. She paused a moment, looking over a page in the folder before her gaze flicked back to Tayuya's. Do you understand, Tayuya-san? Tears blurring her eyes, Tayuya nodded her head slowly, terrified that somehow any little motion would set off the pain again. I don't believe I heard you. Her eyes left Tayuya and again began to slowly read through the folder in front of her. Yes. I understand, Tayuya responded slowly through clenched teeth as she glared back at the woman. Good, Tsunade agreed as she nodded her head slightly. Now, I suppose you're expecting an interrogation? Hesitantly, and more than slightly confused by the woman's question, she again nodded her head, though she continued to refuse to say anything. I imagine you nodded your head, so I won't bother to ask you to repeat yourself this time, Tsunade said before shutting the folder and dropping it onto a nearby table. All you'll be able to provide me would be a few bases that Orochimaru will be sure to have abandoned by the time we arrive there. Any techniques we might want, we could simply harvest from your corpse. Slow sinking realization hit her as she stared back at her with narrowed eyes, except for my fucking curse seal. No, not particularly, she responded back with a shake of her head. While a curiosity, as you've encountered, we have something better. Bullshit. Then why am I even fucking alive? Tayuya demanded with a snarl. You fucking want something from me. Doi? Maybe I was simply curious as to how one of the last Uzumaki ended up working for Orochimaru. Tsunade finally looked back at Tayuya, watching the confusion in her eyes. Oh? I suppose that would explain it. And why he put you in the position he did. You didn't know, did you? Know what? What the hell are you talking about, you crazy bitch? Tayuya demanded as she stared back at the woman. It was the hair that made me curious. Red hair is rare enough that I wanted to check myself. She walked up to the girl and looked her over. Probably the reason you survived the curse seal to begin with. I survived because I'm not fucking weak. Tayuya snapped back with a growl as she glared back at Tsunade as she again tugged, roughly at her bindings. True, Uzumaki aren't weak, Tsunade agreed as she looked over the girl and sighed softly with a shake of her head. Explains the temper too. What, you think trying to tell me I've got some kind of family is going to impress me? What, am I the long-lost heir to a great and noble clan? Tayuya sneered as she glared back Tsunade. Hardly. The air was never lost, Tsunade responded bluntly. It would have been myself, were I not already head of the Senju clan. No, the clan heir is quite alive and rather well. So, what the hell do you want with the filthy daughter of a whore then? She snapped back and glared at her. Doubtful, that your mother was a whore, that is, Tsunade noted. Possible, of course, but unlikely. Civilian, probably, if I'm not mistaken. What the fuck does it matter then? What the hell do you want from me then? Tayuya demanded as she glared back at Tsunade. Currently? Nothing, she stated simply as she looked over the girl critically. I'm simply debating if you're going to be worth the trouble you'll bring if we keep you alive. Tayuya started to yell at her again, before she was cut off. Either way we'll see what happens. If you survive what's to come then we'll see if you stay alive or not, Tayuya-san, Tsunade stated simply as she turned back towards the door. We will talk again later. What do you mean if I survive? Tayuya demanded before she could hear the sound of the door opening then closing. Damn it, answer me. Chapter 37. Sakura stared up at the ceiling above her, the stale smell of antiseptic stinging at her nose as she shifted restlessly upon her bed. She hated it here, hated laying in the bed, helpless, useless, and not knowing. It ate at her as she shifted again and pushed herself up to sit up, wrapping her arms about her knees. Sakura. Instantly her eyes flashed and she looked over to see the familiar, imposing figure almost swallowing the door in a black leather trench coat. Ibiki-sensei, she quickly shifted to the edge of the bed, but faltered when he gave only the slightest little narrowing of his eyes in warning and slowly she swung back and obediently settled back onto the bed. Is there any word? The impromptu mission to prevent the defection of the traitor was successful, he stated simply as he took a step inside, then closed the door behind him. As Kakashi is still out on a mission, it's fallen to me to fully debrief you and give you your new orders until assignments have been finalized. Assignments? She asked, confusion written on her face. But Naruto stopped her, right? She didn't get away? She did not get away. However, how does that leave your team? Ibiki stated simply as he looked down at her and waited expectantly. She started to say before swallowing and slowly nodding. We don't have a team anymore. No, you don't, he agreed. Thankfully, because of your actions, both you and Uzumaki are above suspicion on this. You can expect a commendation in your file, I imagine. Sakura's fingers slowly clenched into the sheets as the tears started to glisten in her eyes as she looked away. I don't want a commendation. What do you want then? It was a prompt and she knew it, but, what's more, it was an unspoken permission to open up. I want us to be a team again. I want Kakashi-sensei, I want Naruto, I want Sasuke-kun again. I want my team back. I want my family back. I don't want to keep losing everyone I start to care about. The tears came now, flowing from her eyes, as she looked up at Ibiki, but, I want to rip her throat out. I want to cut out her precious eyes and make her scream. I want to tear her apart piece by piece, I want. You want to make her pay for what she did. For what she betrayed, he agreed with a nod as he looked out into the window. For what she took away from you. Yes. Sakura almost shouted out before curling back up on the bed. Why did she have to do it? Why couldn't she see we could get strong together? Why couldn't she just be a little bit more patient? Does the why change what happened? He asked as he turned towards her. No, she admitted quietly with a shake of her head. Then deal with the what instead of the why. She made her choice. We simply have to live with the fallout from it, he stated simply. You said something about assignments, Ibiki-sensei, she asked as she looked at the man again. Team 7 is being dissolved, he began simply. Uzumaki is moving to his apprenticeship under Jiraiya-sama. I understand, she bowed her head slightly and fought down the tremble that went through her lip. Then what about? You're being moved to Team 10, under Asuma Sarutobi. Ino's team? But Yamanaka was given a probationary promotion to Chunin and an apprenticeship to Enko, he answered simply. Leaving a vacancy on the team. I understand, she said slowly before looking at him hopefully. Will I still be? You will still be working under myself and Inoichi, time permitting with your new instructor, Ibiki stated simply. What about? She started to ask the question, then paused, looking back at him uncertain as she bit down on her lower lip. That hasn't been released yet, Ibiki stated simply as he then silently arched a brow up at her. Oh. Do I need to stay here any longer, then? She asked slowly. I need to get back to training. I'll see what I can do, he said with a smirk. Oh. Gaara stood there, neutrally as he waited next to his increasingly irate-looking brother as he tilted his head to the side. You do realize it's pointless for you to be upset about this, don't you, Kankuro? How can you just be so damned calm about this? Kankuro demanded as he glared back at his brother. They've made Temari into a damned spoil. Taking hostages for the sake of ensuring behavior is a long tradition that has discouraged hostile behavior more often than encouraging it, Gaara stated diplomatically with a slight shrug of his shoulders. She's our sister. And it had to be either you or her, Gaara pointed out. And they did let you take me back to Suna. It should have been me. Who knows what kind of degrading, perverted things he's doing to her innocent body? Kankuro demanded with a glare at Gaara. Sunshine, innocent? Kin's voice reached their ears as she walked towards them, hands in the pockets of her jacket. You wouldn't be trying to imply something, now would you, spanking girl? Temari asked sweetly as she appeared next to her, giving her a look. Well, considering the things you were encouraging Naruto-sama to do to that innocent body of yours. Kin pointed out with a smug little smirk. Yes, please, keep telling embarrassing things about me in front of my brothers, Temari stated with a growl as she flipped out one of her fans. I'll be happy for the excuse. Temari, Gaara stated simply as he nodded to his sister. Gaara, Temari agreed then looked him over cautiously. You don't look as crazy. Not for Kankuro's lack of trying, Gaara agreed with a nod. Guess Naruto-sama did good work after all, Temari said before looking around. Where is he, anyway? He stopped at the ramen stand, Kin stated with a shrug of her shoulders as she lightly began to eye Temari's brothers carefully. Something about not going through this on an empty stomach. Of course he did, Temari groaned as she lightly palmed her face. He just couldn't make this simple. He doesn't do simple, Kin pointed out with a shrug. You know that as well as I do. Doesn't mean I have to like it, Temari answered with a growl before looking back at her brothers. So, you're here to finalize the ratification of the new treaty? We're here to deliver a scroll and see how you're doing, Kankuro stated as he carefully looked his big sister over. Well, you look all right? So they're not keeping you all locked up? No, not really, Temari agreed with a nod and a shrug of her shoulders. Hell, even been outside the village once already, picking up some new tricks as well. New tricks? Gaara asked as he tilted his head a bit to the side. Wordlessly, she held up her arm, and one of her fans snaked out. As her brothers watched, the fan snapped out, flashing open and closed. Sharp, shining razor's edges caught the sunlight as her arm moved with a fluid grace, keeping the fan moving until it snapped shut in her palm. You're getting better. Still needs work, though, a new voice noted as Jiraiya appeared standing on the wall above them, as he glanced at Gaara and Kankuro. So, these your brothers, huh? Yes, Temari stated flatly before sighing softly as she gestured. Gaara, Kankuro, meet the old pervert. Old pervert? Gaara repeated as he looked questioningly at the man, while Kankuro went pale. Temari? Are you trying to get killed? Kankuro asked as he stared at his sister. No, not currently. Why? She asked curiously. You just called Jiraiya of the Sannin, old pervert, he stated simply as he shifted lightly, staring up at the man with a kind of horrified awe. What else am I supposed to call the guy who could have been our uncle? Temari asked simply with an innocent smile on her lips. Wait, what? Kankuro demanded as he wildly started to look from her to a bemused-looking Jiraiya. You've been just waiting for that, haven't you? Jiraiya asked with a chuckle as he looked back at Temari. I think I've been hanging around Naruto-sama too much, Temari admitted with an unrepentant smirk. What's this and why am I only learning about it now? Kin demanded as she looked back at Temari. Gaara merely blinked confusedly as he looked from Temari to Jiraiya in confusion. He used to sleep with our aunt, Temari answered, accompanied by Jiraiya's nod of agreement. If she hadn't died, who knows what would have happened? Wait, there could have been little mini perverts running around? Kin demanded, her eyes wide as she stared at Temari. Hold it, there was a woman other than. Well, you know who would sleep with him? I am right here, you know. Jiraiya stated with a note of irritation. I'm sorry, someone else who would sleep with him without being paid? Kin corrected. And you're related to her? Temari agreed with a slight nod of her head, our mother's older sister. And the world somehow still exists? Kin asked again as she experimentally poked at a nearby wall. We're not going to get things like spontaneously erupting tentacles, are we? Jiraiya stated flatly. Hilarious. I'm a bitch, remember? Kin stated simply with a shrug of her shoulders, someone going to go get Naruto-sama? Why would someone need to get him? Jiraiya asked as his brow arched up. Because he's off eating ramen somewhere? Temari asked as she narrowed her eyes slightly. Okay, apparently I have to remind you of ninja rule number 1, Jiraiya stated simply as he pointed up the wall. Always remember to look up. Sitting there up the wall, Naruto paused in the middle of eating his ramen, then slurped it down and waved, Heya. As he immediately resumed eating his meal, Temari and Kin looked at him for a moment, then at each other, then at him again. Naruto-sama! Get down here! He paused again, slurping more of the noodles, before tilting his head to the side and looking thoughtful before shaking his head. Nah, I think I'm good here. I've been enjoying eating my meal in peace. You do realize we can come up there, make you come down here, don't you? Kin stated as she glared up at her master. Oh, another voice asked. Can you, Kin-chan? Asked another. Kin blinked slightly as suddenly there was a veritable wall of Narutos around them, all of them grinning back at her, before her eyes narrowed. I can do that trick too, you know. Maybe, but we can do it better and our moves are just that much more awesome than yours are, one of the Narutos stated simply with a smirk. Are those all, you know, physical clones? Kankuro asked as he glanced nervously at Temari. Yes, Temari stated flatly, before sighing softly. I was hoping that we'd have a much more formal introduction, but, Naruto-sama is Naruto-sama. And isn't this the loud-mouthed brat that beat you, Gaara? He asked as he glanced at his little brother. Indeed, Gaara agreed with a nod. Naruto. Hey, Gaara, the main Naruto waved again before resuming his meal. That's it? Kankuro asked, blinking in confusion at his brother. You were expecting something different? Gaara asked as he looked back at Kankuro. I thought you had a bunch of questions for him. It's rude to interrupt someone when they're eating. Yes, it is, Naruto stated, before taking another slurp of his noodles. It's also rude to eat like that in front of other people, Temari stated in annoyance, crossing her arms about her chest. And? Naruto asked, a bit of noodles hanging from his lips. It's not like you never see me do this before. Sighing softly, Temari put his hand on her face and rubbed it lightly, and again, Naruto-sama is Naruto-sama. Whatever. Kankuro, Gaara, allow me to formally introduce you to Naruto-sama. Naruto-sama, I formally introduce you to my little brothers. They are here to make sure I'm all right, bring the acceptance of the new treaty back to Suna, and, in Kankuro's case, whine impotently about all the horribly perverted things he thinks you'll do to me. But who's gonna protect me from all the horribly perverted things you want to do to me? Naruto demanded after taking another slurp of his noodles. No one, Jiraiya said in the perfect deadpan. I'll be happy to protect you, Naruto-sama, Kin stated eagerly. I'd be safer having her protect me from you, he observed before draining the remainder of the ramen broth, and tossing the bowl to Clone. Make sure that gets back, will you? Yeah, the clone grumbled before taking off the ramen stand. So, what's up? Naruto asked, blasé to the glares he was receiving from his girls. Some big fight? Do I need to worry about you trying to kill me, again in Gaara's case? Oh, maybe for your perverted sister's honor? Or is there another group of super bad asses out to try to kill me? I wasn't, Gaara stated blandly. And not that I'm aware of. I can't speak for Kankuro, though. Kankuro stared at Naruto, his mouth hanging in disbelief. For a moment there was silence. Then an airy squeak left Kankuro's mouth. Shrugging shoulders, Naruto let himself fall from the wall, twisted in midair to land on his feet on the street. Okay then. Nice to see you again. I have to go have a talk with my girlfriend. He paused at that, tilting his head to the side before looking over at Jiraiya and noting, man, I never thought I'd actually say that. Have fun. Don't get in trouble, or else. Or else? Jiraiya asked, his arms crossing about his chest as he looked down at the boy. I think someone is forgetting who the apprentice is and who's the master. You and Granny already used up your be evil to Naruto and get away with it allowance for this week, he responded swiftly. And how much research will you get done if the guy who can be in 1,000 places at once is working against you? Jiraiya paused, frowning as he gave Naruto a look before speaking. Are you trying to threaten me, brat? I am threatening you, Naruto emphasized as he looked back over his shoulder at Jiraiya. And if you tried to withhold training for it, I'll go to Granny and you can deal with her. Or she'll deal with you. With that Naruto strolled off, his hands behind his head and whistling a melancholy tune. Behind him, Jiraiya scowled while the girls gaped, Gaara blinked and Kankuro just stared. Finally, Jiraiya shook his head and stated, the brat is getting too damn cheeky for his good. When the fact that Jiraiya had actually allowed Boy to say that to him registered in Kankuro's head, he finally strained his mental processes to the breaking point and they were forced to shut down. Your brother just fainted. Kin noticed in the strained voice. I think they finally cracked Naruto-sama, Temari stated seriously. You know, you might be right, Jiraiya admitted, then shrugged. Ah, well, it'll be harder to crack next time. I'm curious, Gaara noted. Is there something in the water here or is your insignia really a seal designed to warp human perception? I'm afraid that is a highly classified bit of information we cannot to disclose, Kin stated as she finally seemed to recover some of her wits. He seemed to ponder that for a moment before nodding his head. So it's type of communicable insanity? No comment, Jiraiya stated flatly. Oh. The quiet knocking on the door drew Inoichi's attention away from the warm bottle of sake he'd been contemplating. His wife had already denied his daughter from sharing a drink with them, despite the circumstances. Fortunately she couldn't bring herself to deny him the drink. When he opened up the door and saw Naruto standing there, saw his daughter's boyfriend there, he sorely wished he was already halfway through the bottle. Ah, hello, Yamanaka-san. Is Ino here? The boy asked hopefully. For a moment Inoichi stared at him, his hand still on the door, before he asked in a coolly neutral voice, you mean, is your girlfriend here? She, told you, I guess? Naruto asked, suddenly rather nervous. If by that you mean told me that the two of you kissed, with tongue, he answered, his eyes narrowed into slits. Then yes. Just so I'm clear, this is an angry father thing, not a Jinchuriki thing, right? Naruto asked for clarification. Palming his face lightly, Inoichi rubbed the skin over his eyes for a moment, before responding, no, Naruto, this is not a Jinchuriki thing. This is a, you had your tongue in my little princess mouth thing. Naruto brightened visibly and nodded his head happily, as long as it's not a Jinchuriki thing. Inoichi stared at him for a moment before opening the door and resignation, she's in the kitchen with her mother. Thanks, Yamanaka-san. Naruto declared happily. There was a moment where Inoichi just stared after Naruto as the boy quickly started the dart inside, then stopped a few feet in and turned around, grinning sheepishly. As he scratched the back of his head, he asked, where's the kitchen? Shoulders slumping, Inoichi hung his head and then motioned for Naruto to follow him. For the duration of the short guidance, the man was sure this was what it felt like to be condemned. He was leading his daughter's boyfriend to go meet her inside of his own house. The one she had already admitted it to kissing rather intimately. Who was at the door, dear? His wife asked curiously before her eyes widened as he stepped aside and revealed a rather sheepish looking at Naruto. Oh, dear, is this who I think it is? Naruto-kun. Ino almost shouted as her eyes widened. Hi, Ino-chan, he stated nervously. Can I, talk to you for a moment? In private? Inoichi made a slightly strangled sound and looked decidedly uncomfortable with that statement. Seeing the look on his face, his wife smiled sweetly and asked, oh my, so bold. Already looking to indulge our daughter in her carnal desires? Such a good boy you are. Naruto froze in place as he could feel slowly building trickle of killing intent starting to flow out of the man next to him. Slowly turning his head, he looked up at the Inoichi with wide trembling eyes before again asking, this is still not a Jinchuriki thing, right? No. Uzumaki-san, it is most definitely not a Jinchuriki thing, Inoichi growled. Good, because the whole carnal desires thing is not why I'm here, Naruto said with a bright blush. I gotta talk to her about what Granny is making me do. Sounds serious, Ino's mother noted before tilting her head to the side. You're not going to be sent off in a political marriage, are you? Because we didn't really raise our daughter to be the mistress type. Though, if you're good enough, we might make an exception. Ino looked almost ready to explode, her face was so red. As she stared wide-eyed from her mother, to Naruto, to her father, and then cycled between them, she struggled to keep up with what they were saying. When she finished processing what her mother just said, she opened her mouth to protest angrily only to be beaten to the punch by Naruto. No, he protested viciously. It's not like that. She's making me take 2 more spoils. She won't let me talk her out of it. Into stared at him incredulously, she's making you take 2 more? Yes, he agreed with an almost violent nod of his head. I sure as hell don't want anything to do with them. That sentence made gears turn in all 3 Yamanaka's heads. Inoichi was the first to get it, leaving him to stare at Naruto and mix of pity and aggravation. His wife followed a moment later as she sighed and closed her eyes. As she spoke, Ino's eyes had finally lit up with both the realization and outrage. Well, that's us, both tragic and wonderful, she stated with a sigh and a shake of her head and looked out into the window. But now, far, far more tragic. And the second? Wonderful? Wonderful? Ino demanded, her face lit up in absolute outrage. She's a traitor. She tried to defect to Orochimaru. She attacked Sakura. She should be gutted and hung by her own intestines while she drowns in her own vomit and blood. Naruto mumbled under his breath to quiet for them to hear while nodding his head in agreement, though giving Ino an odd look. That would be the tragic part, dear, she stated gently. Though I can imagine a number of reasons Tsunade-sama would do that. She is the last Uchiha in the village. Leaving her to waste away in a cell would be. She glanced over at Inoichi, what would you say, dear? He winced, almost flinching back at her words, before giving their look as if to say, "Do I have to respond to that?" When she nodded her head, he pinched his nose. "I don't like it any more than you do, princess, but unfortunately politics is politics. And the politics in this situation say that we would lose too much if we executed her or left her rotting in prison. I take it there are protections in place in the seal?" Reluctantly nodding his head, Naruto spoke. "Yeah, I decide how far away from me she can get. And other stuff. You'd have to talk to the old pervert to get the full list." "And the other one?" Ino demanded. "They have to make sure that applying the seal will actually get rid of the cursed seal without killing her," he stated. "That means that I have to try it out on someone else with the cursed seal first." Ino just stared at him for a moment, her mind working through the information he'd given her. Then she collapsed back into her seat. "The sound bitchkin beat down?" "Yeah," he admitted as he slumped into a seat, then looked up at her pleadingly. "You have to believe me, Ino-chan. I tried to tell her no. They wouldn't let me." She just looked at him for a moment, staring at him with dull-looking eyes, before sighing heavily. Without saying a word she stood up and walked over to him. Silently she studied him before sitting down in his lap and wrapping them up in a hug. "I believe you." Inoichi coughed uncomfortably, shifting as he fought between the protective father and how adorable the scene was. The warning narrowing of his wife's eyes quickly settled that. I'm going to go check on store." "You do that, dear," his wife agreed. "That'll give me plenty of time to get to know our daughter's boyfriend." As he left, Inoichi had to admit he did feel a sense of vindication that at least the boy was going to get some level of torment. Even if he didn't get properly introduce him to his shovel. Fortunately there was always later for that. As long as he didn't keep making sure it wasn't a Jinchuriki thing. "Oh, Sasuke Uchiha," the voice stated flatly. She sat up at her name and then looked dully at the door. After a moment she could hear the audible sound of the lock opening. Then the audible squeal of protests from the hinges opening up reached her ears. Standing in the doorway was the woman she guessed to be Tsunade Senju, the Hokage. Tall, blonde, with an impossibly impressive bust in a gray top, with a green jacket hanging on her shoulders. And cold, distant eyes staring down at her. For a moment there was silence as the two stared at one another, before Sasuke broke it by speaking. "Am I to be transferred to the prison now?" "No," she stated simply. "We don't plan to send you to the prison." "Execution, then?" she asked dully, bringing one leg back against her chest, her heel catching on the edge of your seat, tilting forward as she rested her chin on her knee. "That was my preferred choice, yes," the Hokage agreed. "However, that may or may not be your fate." "I'm being given a choice?" she asked, her brows furrowing in disbelief. "No. You lost that right when you decided to turn traitor," Tsunade stated with a slight hiss of displeasure in her voice. "There is no choice. We are testing an alternative. If it works, it will be applied to you. If it does not, I will decide whether or not you will be publicly executed for your crime." "An alternative? You are the one who was so eager to sell herself into slavery. You may just get your wish." Chapter 38. Tayuya was less than pleased with her current predicament. She was currently naked from the waist up and completely incapable of moving even the slightest bit. On top of that, some bastard was painting something on her as she lay unresponsive on a smooth floor completely covered in what looked like little black squiggles. She knew, of course, what they were. The lines and connections for some kind of ceiling array and, based on her presence and positioning, something that was going to be applied to her. Every part of her wanted to scream and curse, to claw and punch and kick and bite them all, while cursing them out until their ears melted off their damned heads. But she couldn't. The woman, Tsunade if she was to be believed, had given her something. A poison, a drug, she wasn't sure which. All she knew was that it completely shut down her body's ability to listen to what she wanted it to do beyond breathing and blinking. Even then it only went so far. Conscious control of her body seemed beyond her. She couldn't even halt her breathing or really close her eyes. It was terrifying. Then she heard the voices. "So, this is her, huh?" The voice was male, older, but not elderly. Wonder if he even knew what he had? With him, who knows? He's a genius, but... Tsunade's voice stated simply. "You've taken the drugs into account? Please, princess, who do you think you're talking to?" he said, obviously affronted. "An old pervert I've known entirely too long," she shot back. "Now get on with it. We need to be ready for the brat." "I love you too, princess," was shot back before Tayuya could feel the brush tickling up her arm, over onto her shoulder. "Even if you're a scary old witch." "What did you call me?" Tsunade demanded. Careful, careful, wouldn't want me to do a misstroke and completely destroy everyone in a horribly twisted and excruciatingly painful death, would you?" the man chided with amusement. You do remember that I have all the time in the world to slowly remind you of my displeasure after all this is over, yes? Tsunade stated acidically. Yes, yes, the man responded dismissively. Why don't you go get the brat while I finish this up, and leave you alone with a young girl? I have some restraint, he responded, more than slightly offended. Fine, but you better not try anything, she warned him. I like women, princess, not little girls, he shot back. If she could, Tayuya would have turned crimson at his comment and broken into a blistering attack on him in any way she could. Instead she was here, helpless. She couldn't move, she couldn't say anything, she couldn't do anything. She was trapped in her own body. She heard soft steps and the sound of a door shutting and locking. Then she could feel the soft, cold, wet touch slowly, almost delicately, going to work on her back. You'll have to excuse Tsunade-chan. She means well, but she's rather... He paused, as if searching for the words while the sensation on her back continued to work in a steady, flowing pace over her skin. Well, Tsunade is Tsunade is Tsunade. Tayuya wished she could do something, even if it was just send the man a glare. Instead she just lay there, forced to listen to him prattling on. Who the hell did this guy think he was? Oh, that's right, I didn't introduce myself did I, he stated with a pleasant quality to his voice. We can't do the proper ones, of course. You're a little, unable to introduce yourself at the moment. Perfectly understandable, really, as Tsunadeheim is rather good at what she does and when it comes to poisons and drugs, she knows more about them than anyone. She would reluctantly agree with his assessment. Extremely reluctantly. But the woman was one of the Sannin for a reason. Well, Tayuya-chan, of the north gate of Orochimaru's four sounds. He let his voice trail off, still smirking as he continued to work the seal onto her skin. You have now officially met all three Sannin. If she could move, she would have frozen as suddenly she realized just how deep down the shithole she was. One Sannin, she had the slimmest of chances of getting away from. If she hadn't been drugged nearly comatose and in the middle of the enemy territory. Okay, so she was already screwed. This was just the cherry on the top of the well and truly fucked Sunday. In case you're a bit confused, I am the gallant sage Jiraiya, he continued, and again she wished she could glare at him at the condescending manner in which he spoke. And I thought I'd give you some ideas of just what's this seal I'm putting on you is going to do. First off, it should wipe away that pesky little curse seal of Roki's. Second, from what I understand, you already got a taste of some of the enhancements from our little bitch, Kin. What I haven't exactly gone into great detail in telling them is that if Naruto dies, you'll be eaten alive by the demonic chakra that's going to be mixing with your system. Without him and the seal to filter it, you'll all just end up having a nice big rush, then you'll start screaming as it devours you from your chakra system out. Nasty, isn't it, he noted, and she found it so easy to imagine him behind her, smirking down at her. Of course, running away? Well, then you end up on the other side of the equation, the chakra just gets sucked out of your body. You get weaker and weaker the farther you run. Eventually, after you've collapsed, where your body is even more helpless than this, you just end up not even having the energy to breath. Oh, how she wanted to glare at him now more than ever. But, you'll have more chakra potential than you know what to do with, Jiraiya stated calmly. Potential that won't require you to reach into something that'll leave you helpless after you use it. And, unless you really do something stupid, training on how to use it. She hated them oh so very much. She hated the way they talked to her. She hated the way they treated her. She hated the way that right now, somehow, they scared her more than Orochimaru did. She hated it all. Oh. Temari sighed a bit as she watched her Gaara sit comfortably, calmly, and more importantly peacefully in the seat across from her as they sat at the restaurant, her fan slowly, moving around her wrist and hand. Next to him, Kankuro nervously twitched his fingers, causing his chopsticks to move about above his hand on his chakra strings. At her side, Kin was flipping through a book on sealing, glancing up on occasion to see what the others were doing and saying. So far, it hadn't been much. So, you appear to be adjusting well, Gaara said far more diplomatically than she was used to him being. Found out things, here and there, Temari said simply as she settled back into her seat. Found out where Heike's was. Kankuro froze and stared back at Temari wide-eyed, before narrowing his gaze, then who's the bastard who? She took a drink of water, before shaking her head ruefully. From what I told you before, she was in a relationship with a Leaf Nin. She was ambushed by a bunch of Mist Nin as retaliation for what we'd done looking for the third Kazekage. He came upon her just in time to avenge her. Kankuro frowned slightly. They could have been lying to you. Well, personally I wouldn't really call him that to his face, Shizun's voice said cheerfully as she appeared next to their table. So, Sunshine-chan, these are your little brothers? Temari blinked for a moment and then sighed as she slumped back in her seat. So, are the rest of you going to come out? Ah, she's growing up. Anko appeared behind her, draping herself over Temari as her breasts settled atop her head. She actually noticed us. Or she just figured that we would be here because we found it too amusing to not be. Yugugo commented as she appeared at the table next to them, sitting across from the referee of the preliminary matches of the third round, Hey-8, who appeared from a melting distortion. Well, you two found it too amusing, Hey-8 noted with a slight smile on his lips. You just dragged me along for the ride. Temari did not groan, no matter how much she wanted to, as she reached up and lightly palmed her face, stifling the sigh that threatened to escape her mouth. Did you really expect anything else from them? Kin asked as she arched a brow towards Temari. I don't know why I didn't think they'd do it, Temari stated simply as she sighed softly. I guess I figured they were more likely to wait until Naruto-sama showed back up. Ah? Kin made a sound of agreement, before noting, you just forgot how short their patience is when they're bored. Yes, Temari agreed. Gaara took a moment to look at the three women and the man before looking back Temari, his brows furrowing. I was not aware you were this popular. Temari. Kankuro was pinching his nose as he tried to look anywhere but at his sister and the woman who was using her breasts as Temari's hat. Can you please get her to stop that? No, Temari stated flatly, I can't. She's such a quick study, isn't she, Zun-chan? Anko said cheerfully. Hello, you must be Gaara-san and Kankuro-san. Shizun bowed politely and smiled cheerfully at the two. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Tsunaden-sama's apprentice, Shitsune. I do hope that you find our hospitality acceptable and please excuse us for the assassination squads we have following you while you're in Konoha. Kankuro's attention was torn forcibly to Shizun as his mouth hung open. Gaara nodded his head as he gave her a polite bow and responded, understandable, Shizun-san. We thank you for the hospitality. We shall be much more gracious guests than we were previously. I'm glad. Sunshine-chan would be upset if we had to send you to meet Yuya-san, Shizun said with that same calm smile on her face. So we appreciate your gracious manners. Yes, she's evil, Temari stated as she looked at Kankuro. They all are. And they know it. Why am I included in that? Hey-8 asked curiously as she sipped at a steaming glass of tea. I haven't done anything to you. She's sleeping with you, Temari pointed to a blank-faced Yugugo. No way she'd do that if you weren't. She just likes the way I handle my sword, Hey-8 stated completely seriously. Yugugo nodded her head, he's not wrong. Temari stared for a moment and then let her head fall forward, bowing. Next to her, Kin pursed her lips thoughtfully. She took a moment to glance from Hey-8's sword to Yugugo's. His does look bigger, Kin noted before looking back at her book. Now, Kin-chan, Shizun chided lightly. It's not the size but the skill of the one wielding it that matters. What the? Kankuro struggled to get out as he looked at the various individuals around him, then to Gaara. I think you were right about the communicable insanity. Really? I was starting to think they were all just perverts, Gaara observed calmly. Anko smirked at the red-haired boy, that too. Once you get used to it, it's not really that bad of a place to be. Temari noted with a slight shrug of his shoulders. Temari, you're a spoil, Kankuro stated with a sullen glare. How does that make this any kind of place to be? How much more willing to actually behave are you and Suna now? Temari countered back and then sighed a bit. What did you expect to happen, Kankuro? That somehow we'd be offered a chance to just go back to business as usual with Konoha just bending over backwards to make things better for us when we were the ones to betray them? I understand why it happened, he responded back as he gave her a slight glare. I will probably even eventually accept it. But what I can't understand is why you seem okay with it. She wasn't, Kin stated casually. She sulked and pouted and complained and whined. It was annoying. Like you're one to comment about annoying, Temari snapped back. Really, do we really need to get into such vivid details of what actions you've both made? Shizun asked calmly as she arched a brow and smiled pleasantly at them both. We can, of course, and really, there is so much to cover, I'll need to know if I should make time in my schedule for you both. I think I'll pass. You? Temari asked as she glanced to Kin. I'm good, Kin agreed quickly with a nod of her head. Oh? Such a pity, I was looking forward to the break, Shizun noted with a slight sigh of disappointment. Oh well. But, to settle things, no, Sunshine did not just accept it. And Kin was also quite sulky for some time. Things happened, they accepted it. By the way, Gaara? Temari spoke up as she warily looked at her youngest brother, you need to start training. Ido? Gaara repeated, confusion on his face. Yeah, Temari agreed as she recalled the fight between Naruto and Kisame and the information she'd looked up on the members of Akatsuki they knew about. Father? Orochimaru killed father. There are people after the bijou that scare Orochimaru. I saw how one of them just played with Naruto-sama. Naruto-sama was fighting on borderline Jounin level, Kisame Hoshigaki laughed. Truly? Gaara frowned a bit at the statement. He already knew he needed to train, he already knew he needed to get stronger. What his sister said, though. They're going to be coming for you, and coming for Naruto-sama, Temari stated seriously as he stared into her brother's eyes unflinchingly. Naruto-sama has Jiraiya-san and others. You need to step up your training. You too, Kankuro. Get old lady Chiyo involved. That crazy old bat? Kankuro demanded as he stared back at her. Are you insane? Chiyo Dano is the foremost expert in puppetry still loyal to Suna, Gaara pointed out quietly, his lips pursing softly before he looked at Temari warily. Do you believe this Akatsuki will include? It took Temari a moment to realize exactly who Gaara was hinting at and she grimaced in response, it might. I wouldn't rule it out. He is S-class. Shizune arched a brow slightly, before frowning as she listened to their conversation. Would you be talking about Sasori? Yes, Gaara stated with a slight nod of his head and a frown. Which would imply that this organization is likely fully briefed on the typical abilities of my predecessors. Then pick up new ones, Kin stated simply as she flipped through her book. It's what Naruto-sama is doing and what I'm going to be doing. And, hell, even what Sunshine is doing. You don't seem very big on training, Kankuro noted with a slight frown. Kin looked up from her book and gave the boy a look that implied a great number of different things. It's called shadow clones. And you think I'm reading up on seals for pure pleasure reading? Ohu, Enko perked up immediately. You're on shadow clone training now? Why didn't anyone tell me? Because they're on control and manipulation practice, Kin stated flatly as she gave the woman a look. I have basics I need to get down first. Fool! Enko pouted as she glared sullenly at the girl. That's no fun. You already have an apprentice to look after, remember, Enko-chan? Shizune pointed out helpfully. You do want to make sure that Naruto-kuin's little girlfriend passes her review, don't you? Curses, Enko stated sullenly, refusing to acknowledge the point. Just means all the more fun for me, Yugugo noted as she smiled serenely at Kin. Damn it, Kin cursed lightly as she focused more heavily on her book. And now it's at the point where we can include Sunshine, Yugugo agreed with a nod of her head. Hey, won't you help me instruct these poor little students that have fallen into my hands? Sure, I need something to do while I wait to be cleared for active duty again after Tsunade-sama's procedure, Heiei agreed before coughing quietly into his hand. Apologie. Double damn it, Temari agreed. Oh. Naruto glanced nervously over at Ino, who was looking at him with an incredibly neutral look on her face. I already told you I believed you, Naruto, Ino stated simply as she walked with him. I know this isn't your choice. Okay, he asked looking at her still nervously. I don't like it, she stated flatly, crossing her arms about her chest. At all. It's bad enough I already had to share you with the bitch and Sunshine. Now 2 more? When does it stop? Naruto slumped slightly and sighed, when I become Hokage and say no more? Ino twitched slightly and growled lightly as she leaned in and grabbed hold of him. Pinning her body against his, she leaned in and then bit firmly against the side of his neck. I am not good at sharing, Naruto. He. Naruto chuckled nervously as he suppressed a shiver that ran down his spine. Ino-chan. Mine, she stated simply as she gave him a glare, and I really don't like having to share you with Sasuke of all people. Naruto shuddered at that reminder. Oh, man, that's, you wow. I mean, I thought she was a he. I still think of Sasuke as a he. Not a she. And that's just, you. You're lucky I'm not Sakura, Ino noted with a slight smirk on her lips. Though you might be too butch for her fantasies. Huh? Naruto looked at her in confusion. I keep forgetting how dense you are sometimes, she noted before firmly threading her arm around his and holding close to him as they walked. As Naruto grumbled softly, Ino leaned into him and frowned slightly as she caught sight of the various civilians sending cold looks of disgust. It irritated her. The way that they looked at them, the way they could look at Naruto and see anything but Naruto. And to judge him on something that was trapped inside of him, that he was keeping prisoner. She wondered how he managed to still see the bright side of Konoha. So, you think we have time to stop for a bowl of ramen before we go there? Naruto asked hopefully. Weren't you telling me you already had a bowl before you came to see me, she pointed out, shifting slightly to crane her neck up to look at him, still resting it against his shoulder. Well, yeah, but then we had all that talking and we had to talk about this stupid Sasuke situation and… You're a glutton, she finished for him with a roll of her eyes. Hey! I burn through energy really quickly. And I can't make a bunch of shadow clones like I normally would, and… He paused, blushing brightly. I'd really like to eat a meal with you? Fine, she said with a slight huff of feigned indignation. He saw it, he embodied it. Maybe somehow the fourth Hokage had been able to see that when he chose Naruto because she couldn't really imagine anyone else managing to simply endure like he had. Not like he had. Other people got worn down, they seemed to crack or break but not Naruto. Awesome, he declared cheerfully and then almost bashfully leaned down and kissed her cheek. And she was going to do her best to make sure that he never did. Oh, it had been easy enough to ignore what was coming when he'd been with Ino at Ichiraku's getting a bowl of ramen and simply just enjoying being with her. He wasn't sure how he was really supposed to react to that. On one hand, he did like it, quite a lot, especially when she pressed up against him, rubbing along him, kissing him. On the other, he didn't want to end up a pervert like Kakashi and Jiraiya. And Kin. And Temari. And Ino. And Sakura. And it was a dawning realization that he had built up his life in a way that left him completely and totally surrounded by perverts. Damn it. Something wrong? Ino asked next to him, frowning slightly as she looked at him worriedly. He froze for a moment, then grinned sheepishly at her. Oh, nothing. Just realized with my luck I'm going to be stuck with even more perverts. Well, Sasuke wasn't a pervert, right? She reminded him. Temari wasn't a pervert before, either, Naruto reminded her with a grunt. Well, hopefully that won't change with Sasuke, Ino stated simply. Naruto, a new voice spoke up solemnly as Kakashi appeared in front of them in a swirl of leaves. I understand there was an incident. Naruto stared at him for a moment while Ino snorted softly. That's one way of putting it. And from what I was told, you both handled yourselves admirably. Kakashi was apparently struggling for the right words as he looked over the both of them. I'm sorry about Sasuke. She made her choice, Naruto said with a frown on his lips. We did what we had to. Kakashi nodded his head quietly. I know. Tsunade-sama said you're to get Sasuke and one of the other prisoners as? The frown turned into a scowl as Naruto looked away with a glare. I told her I didn't want to do it. She ordered me to. I understand, Kakashi said seriously as he put his hand on Naruto's shoulder. It can't be easy. And now they're going to consume your life with horrible things like shopping and gossip. He twisted in an almost inhuman way out of the path of Ino's stab with a sunban and pouted at her. Now, that wasn't very nice. I'm now Enko-sensei's apprentice, Ino stated flatly as she glared at the man. Ah, right, that, Kakashi reluctantly nodded his head in understanding. I suppose so. Though what will the review board say about you attacking a jounin? I'll mention it's you and they'll understand, Ino growled. Kakashi's shoulders immediately slumped. True. Was there something you wanted to talk about, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked with only a slight hint of irritation. I kind of have to get to ANBU headquarters to start the procedure. What luck. I was heading there myself, Kakashi said cheerfully. Let me help you both get there. You don't need to. Naruto started to protest. I insist. And with that he grabbed hold of both of their shoulders and vanished in a swirl of leaves. Oh, you're late, Tsunade stated simply as she gave Naruto a look. Ah, sorry, I had to. Kakashi started to respond, before blinking as her glare turned to him. Oh, you meant Naruto. You didn't really tell me when I was supposed to be here, Naruto countered back. You just sent a messenger for me to come. Are you trying to argue with me, brat? Tsunade asked as she glared back at the boy. Telling the truth, Granny, he snapped back without missing a beat. Brat, she stated with a sour twist of her lips and a shake of her head. Come on, we're waiting on you and the drugs won't last too much longer. Drugs? Naruto repeated with a blink. She tends to be rebellious, Tsunade stated flatly. And I'm not going to risk her screwing something up and hurting you. Ah, right, Naruto slowly nodded his head as Tsunade turned and walked deeper into the complex. As he followed after her, he glanced nervously around before feeling the reassuring squeeze on his hand from Ino. Uncertain at first, he then squeezed her hand in turn and offered her a sheepish smile. That earned him a roll of her eyes and a nudge in his shoulder. If you're both finished flirting? Tsunade asked with a hint of exasperation. I don't know, it's rather cute, Kakashi noted with a bright smile. Ah, such wonderful research you give your sensei. Jiraiya's voice added, cackling softly as he began to scribble away in his book. Such wonders, such delights, such plot twists. I'm pretty sure that anything you're writing based on this will not resemble what happened in the least, Ino stated flatly as she shook her head and gave the man a glare. You old pervert. Bah, artistic license, Jiraiya said dismissively before gesturing into the room. Ready? Naruto sighed and shrugged his shoulders. I don't suppose reminding you that I really don't want to do this is going to do any good? Not in the least, Tsunade agreed with a nod of her head. You're going to do this. Had to try, Naruto stated with a frown. Right, Tsunade stated skeptically. You know the drill by now, brat, Jiraiya stated. Sighing, Naruto took off his coat and handed it to Ino before carefully walking through the seal to the unmoving girl at the center. So, just like before? Just like before, Jiraiya agreed. We already have Shizun with your other girls, so we can make sure to watch what happens. Right, Naruto said warily and nodded his head just a bit before holding out his hand to Jiraiya. You need more of my blood, right? Yup, Jiraiya agreed, taking the boy's hand, only to have Tsunade interject. Let's leave that to the trained medical professionals, shall we, she stated blandly before using a scalpel to carefully open up the boy's hand without doing any major damage. Works for me, Jiraiya agreed before nodding his head after a moment. That's enough. Tsunade nodded her head and carefully sealed up the wound as Jiraiya went to work mixing the blood into the ink. A short time later, he placed Naruto's hand between the girl's shoulder blades and went to work completing the seal. As he worked, Naruto frowned as he noticed a difference. Hey, what's with that stuff on the back of her neck? Cursed seal, Jiraiya stated simply. We're going to see if we really can wipe it away. Oh, Naruto stated slowly before carefully nodding his head. Ok? Done. Just like before, but you might have to, well, this time things might be fighting you. Frowning, Naruto nodded his head and began to push out his chakra like before. Just like before, he could feel his awareness of her body beginning to slowly expand. He could feel the pulsing of her coils, the echoing sensation rippling back into him. Then he could feel the first sign that there was something different. There was he wasn't sure how to describe it. It was like some kind of foul oil sticking to her coils, infecting it, polluting it. It was utterly and completely foreign and, unlike his own chakra, there was something, forcing it to remain. Her chakra wasn't really harmonized to it. It was more forced into her body. And then he could feel the way it tried to spread back into him. With a frown, he continued to feed his chakra into her, harmonizing her coils into his. But he could feel it, the way the closer their coils got to one another, the more that taint tried to push into him. You're playing a dangerous game. He recognized the voice immediately, almost breaking his concentration, before he quickly recovered and continued to work on the seal. It's not a game. Perhaps. Do you truly want to let that thing in? Hell no. I want that filth out of her. So she can be another one of your little pets? There was amusement in the Bija's voice as he spoke. I must admit, you've been far more entertaining than my previous hosts. You're not going to try and convince me to let you out so you can finish destroying Konoha again, are you? Brat, the QB responded before pausing. Do you want the girl to live? Why are you asking? Boredom, curiosity, the desire to avoid you wallowing in foolish pity, was the response. Take your pick. Of course, I'm just a monster, so what do I know? I won't help you destroy Konoha, he responded stubbornly. I never wanted to attack your little village to begin with. While I prefer this seal over my previous one, it was not my doing that led to the attack on your village, the QB responded. I wasn't the one that responsible for your parents' deaths. That was the same person who bound my mind and ripped me out of your mother's body. What? Naruto voiced the question aloud, causing the people around him to look at him worriedly as he continued to focus on his task. I have been a prisoner since the battle that carved out what you know as the Valley of the End. Your mother was my jailer before you. The act of removing me from her was fatal. It is a testament to the strength of her life force that she survived long enough to aid in my sealing into you. Then what do you want? And why should I believe you? He demanded as he could feel the chakra inside of Tayuya stir more angrily, trying to seep into him at every chance it got. You are different. My previous hosts tried to ignore me. When we did speak, they spoke to me as if I was nothing but a mindless thing, a beast. They did not use my power, they suppressed it entirely. You, though. I told you, we're stuck together and you're living in my body. And we're in this together. Yes, now we are. There was a pause in the answer before the QB continued, irritation now evident. Thanks to your pet's ability to channel my chakra when you do, I no longer have the ability to simply overwhelm you. You can balance the chakra between you. And even if I could get away from you, that man is still out there. Who? The bastard with those accursed eyes that turned me into a prisoner in my own body. The one that wants to use me as his puppet, his tool. I am not some nameless, pathetic little spirit. I will not be a slave. What's your name then? Naruto asked as he could feel his chakra starting to ebb in power as he continued to feed the brightly glowing seal. What? You just said you weren't nameless, so what's your name? There was a pause before the voice spoke, Kurama. My name is Kurama. Well, Kurama, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, will you help me out, so we can kick the asses of the jackasses that want to fuck up our lives even more? There was silence, before slowly a chuckle began to echo to Naruto's ears. You have guts, Naruto Uzumaki. And you're going to be making one of those bastard Uchiha with their accursed eyes into your pet if you succeed with this one, yes? That's what they're planning. I find that idea appealing. So, for this, and only for this, I will allow you to have a taste of what it means to truly use my chakra. Wah! Confusion rippled through Naruto before suddenly he could feel an enormous rush of power flowing through him. Those watching him could only stare in shock as Naruto seemed to transform into a being of pure, radiant yellow energy. Instantly Naruto could feel the tainted chakra of the seal recoiling, pulling away from him, trying to hide. As this new chakra flowed into Tayuya's coils, the polluting chakra of the cursed seal withdrew further and further back into its origin. And then, when it had retreated fully back into the seal, it wrapped up that last bastion in a great swell of power. In that moment a molted, dark form tried to erupt out of the seal, a gurgling, half-heard scream filled the air as a half-formed face and hand could be seen for a brief moment. Then they melted back, the burning spread of the power flowing through Naruto covered Tayuya. When it finished, it burned the blemish of the cursed seal away. Then, when the last of the cursed seal was wiped away, Naruto collapsed back onto Tayuya's thighs. What the hell was that? I don't fucking know, but could you get the fuck off of me and let me have some damned clothes? Tayuya demanded with snarl as she suddenly found herself back completely in control of her body. Heh, there might be hope for you yet, Naruto Uzumaki. Oh. Somewhere, hidden in the land of rice, Orochimaru screamed in agony. Chapter 39. Naruto lay back in the hospital bed and sighed in irritation. He was confined to the bed while Tsunade ran tests on him and on his latest spoil. In the meantime, he was stuck, waiting with nothing to do. So, he settled for having a conversation with the newly dubbed Kurama, formerly known as the fuzzy bastard tenant that wanted to destroy Konoha. So, if you hadn't helped me, what would have happened? It was a valid concern for the boy as he settled back and closed his eyes for his conversation. A long, boring process of slowly smothering that foreign chakra beneath your own, Kurama had responded with the mental equivalent of a shrug and a snort. Or it would have tried to force itself into you and the rest of your little harem and died in a far less spectacular fashion. Then why do anything at all? Naruto demanded back. Because then she would have died and the Uchiha wouldn't have been put under your thumb next. But, you said it would have died. In you and them, yes. In the girl, since the seal connecting her to you had never been finished? She would have died screaming as the dead chakra hit her gates. Oh. So, Kin and Temari were never in danger? Your little pets were never in danger, the only life in the balance was the foul-mouthed little bitches. Which is why you asked me if I wanted her to live. Naruto pondered the notion and slowly nodded his head. That and I really was horribly amused at the idea of an Uchiha being turned into the pet of my container. It was a frank admission by Kurama but Naruto could practically feel the grin on the fox's face. What the hell did you do? Kin had arrived and she was most assuredly less than happy. Hello, Kin-chan. It's nice to see you too. Did you have a good time with Sunshine's brothers? Naruto responded with an arch of his brow. You. I think she would like to know what happened and why we turned yellow for a time, Naruto-sama, Temari cut in as she shook her head a bit. Oh, that was Kurama, Naruto stated simply. Kurama? Kin repeated, staring at Naruto. Yup, Naruto agreed. You're doing this just to be an ass, aren't you? Temari stated flatly. Would I do that, Sunshine? Naruto asked with an entirely too innocent smile. In a heartbeat, Temari agreed with a frown. I think we've been a bad influence on him, Kin noted. I know you've been a bad influence on him, Ino's voice cut in as she walked into the room, arms crossed about her chest and a frown on her face. What did you do, Naruto? I just did what they asked me to do. Naruto responded insistently. It's just it didn't work out how they thought it would. Aha, Ino repeated, still giving him a look. I'm serious. Naruto insisted before glancing around furtively. I just had to get some help from Kurama. Kurama? Ino repeated, a brow arched up, arms still across her chest. Well, you see, funny story. Naruto shifted about slightly. Well, the Kyuubi has a name. It's Kurama. My name is not a funny story, Kurama countered back with a huff. That was not the Kyuubi's chakra, Kin stated authoritatively. I know what that feels like and that was definitely not it. Yes, it was, Naruto argued back with a huff. I was the one that was actually involved in it, I know what it was. That doesn't make sense. Kin argued back. The Kyuubi chakra has always been red. Angry, hungry. That stuff was. It was a taste of what it truly means to wield his power, Naruto quoted and shrugged. And I have to wait here for them to finish checking me over and make sure it's all good so we can do Sasuke next. But, Kin started to protest. Why was it different this time then? Temari asked instead. Because apparently if I did it the usual way, the girl would have died? Naruto stated. And Kurama-san just wanted to help out of the kindness of his heart? Ino asked with no small amount of skeptic sarcasm in her voice. Actually, he did it because if she had died, then they wouldn't have done it to Sasuke, Naruto said with a slight shift in the bed. He finds the thought of making her a slave ironically amusing. Indeed. Okay, Ino stated with a nod as she relaxed slightly, that makes more sense. How does that make more sense? Kin demanded. According to the history books, the Kyuubi was under the control of the Uchiha. Madara, specifically, Ino answered. And since none of the Bijou served anyone willingly, it had to have been controlled somehow. And the chance to make an Uchiha a slave has to be appealing to it. Well, at least your mate has a brain. Hopefully she rubs off on you more. Naruto's eye twitched slightly at that comment and he reflexively muttered, I am so going to get you for that. What was that, Naruto-kun? Ino asked sweetly, her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Not you. Naruto said quickly. Him. Ino looked at him neutrally for a moment before shaking her head, sighing and giving him a look. You do realize, of course, you owe me a damned good date and a good make-out session now. Ido? Naruto asked, eyes wide and staring. Yes, you do, Ino agreed with a firm nod of her head before smirking. And if you're good? She leaned in and whispered into his ear. In response, Naruto's entire face turned a bright tomato red. Then a trickle of blood flowed out of his nose as he just stared back at her smirk. Naruto continued to stare back at her for a moment, before his head hung and his shoulders slumped. I'm doomed, aren't I? Yes. Definitely. Absolutely. Amusingly. Oh. Sasuke shifted about on the heels she was forced to wear now. It had been a learning experience to say the least, the need to balance and step, and the way that it added to the femininity she'd spent so long denying. It wasn't really debilitating, it wasn't a career-ending condition, but it was a constant reminder of what she'd tried to do. And she knew that it was likely done on purpose. Sighing, she shifted a bit then again walked back and forth along the length of her cell and back. She had nothing else better to do while she waited. If her manacles hadn't blocked her chakra usage, she'd had been walking up the walls and across the ceiling. As it was, she was frustratingly aware of the mincing little steps that made her hips sway the fetter chains limited her to. Ah, I see you've adapted already, Shizun stated as she stepped in front of the cell. And in such a girly manner. Why, I'm surprised. Who knew, Uchiha-chan. Stiffening slightly, she then bowed forward as much as she was allowed with her restraints, Shizun-san. And so polite. Shizun clapped her hands together lightly. Why, one would think you were accepting your fate instead of just hoping to lure us into a sense of false security. Very nice, Uchiha-chan. Why, if I hadn't been there when your broken, bleeding and unconscious body was taken to me for healing, I might actually believe it. Oh, I trust your ankles aren't giving you too much problem? I am so very sorry about that, but I'm afraid with everything, it completely slipped my mind to double-check to make sure you would be able to walk properly. Sasuke's eye twitched only slightly as she nodded her head, understandable. Of course, Shizun agreed with a nod. Well, fortunately I'm sure you'll be getting much more in touch with your feminine side in the future. If you survive, at least. I see, Sasuke stated even though she really didn't. Why, imagine the curves you'll start to put on when you're pregnant with your first child. Shizun continued cheerfully. All those hormones rushing through your body. Sasuke twitched slightly. Yes, I know what you're thinking, you're an Uchiha, Shizun agreed with a nod of her head, but, fortunately, there have been wonderful advances made by Tsunade-sama in the areas of cosmetic medicine. You'll never be mistaken for a boy again by the time we're done with you. It took all her self-control to keep her face utterly and completely neutral as she just stared back at Shizun, who, in turn, just grinned wider, eyes sparkling as she continued, and all those drab, boring old clothes? Don't worry, nothing like that for you anymore. No need to pretend to be a boy ever again. I see, she said in quiet, controlled voice that only warbled slightly. Oh, I'm not sure you do just yet, Uchiha-chan, Shizun stated with a chilly smile as she leaned in close to the bars. Every little thing that you were is going to be stripped away from you. Who you were, what you were, you will look in the mirror and not see the Sasuke Uchiha who was the Konoha Nin. You will see a beautiful, feminine, made-up little sex pet for your master. You will recognize just enough of who that was in that image, to remember, just enough to see how far you've fallen, just enough to understand just how much betrayal has cost you. And then everyone else will see the same. You will be a walking, talking little reminder of just what treason can cost. She smiled then, cheerfully back at Sasuke, and you will bear it all with a smile, and do you know why, Uchiha-chan? And Sasuke did. Her head bowed as she spoke the answer quietly, because it is better than I deserve. So glad you understand, Shizen said with a nod and a smile before she turned and walked away, leaving Sasuke with her thoughts. Oh, well, they both appear to be fine, Tsunade agreed reluctantly with a tsk of displeasure as she looked down clinically at Tayuya. Though with this one it might not last if she doesn't learn to watch her mouth. Well, there's always the old standby, Jiraiya noted, with an innocent smile. What, wash my fucking mouth out with soap? Tayuya declared with a sneer. No. Slug slime, Jiraiya corrected cheerfully. Probably with a healthy dose of toad oil mixed in. Tayuya opened her mouth but couldn't quite find the words to respond as she stared at the two Sannin, before repeating. Slug slime and toad oil? There's only a 10% chance you'll turn into a sentient toad statue, still completely aware but unable to move, unable to react, unable to interact in the least, Jiraiya agreed. And that's just with the toad oil. With the slug slime? Oh, boy. Tayuya stared at them both and then shrank back down and remained silent. Excellent. I told you she could be trained. Jiraiya smiled beatifically at Tsunade. Tayuya growled low in her throat, glaring at him, but otherwise kept her mouth shut. Yes, yes, Tsunade agreed with a nod of her head as she looked at Tayuya critically. Well, at least it's something. We'll need to sit her down with Kurenai for genjutsu training once she gets her chakra control back up to par. What? Tayuya stated as she stared back at the woman, not quite sure she heard her right. Your chakra control is going to be non-existent until you learn how to handle your increasing potential, Tsunade answered clinically. We saw it in both Kin and Temari. At the mention of Kin, Tayuya growled out again as her eyes flashed dangerously. Now, Tayuya-chan, don't be like that, Jiraiya said. She's your big sister now. Tayuya turned her head and stared at Jiraiya. The F. Language, he reminded her with a waggled finger. Kin has seniority over you with Naruto and Konoha. Fortunately, for you at least, Temari is the one who has disciplinary privileges over you, Tsunade cut in smoothly, and shares seniority with Kin. And Naruto's girlfriend outranks you all. Jiraiya stated before pulling out his notebook, OH. Sweet muse, how you love me so. Tsunade flicked him atop his head, sending him face first into the floor, before looking back at Tayuya. I will warn you about this once, and only once. You will behave. You are not Kin, who chose her fate, you are not Temari, who is here for political reasons. You betray or attack us once. She paused a moment before Tayuya was subjected to Tsunade's full killing intent focused down upon her with laser-like intensity. I will slowly rot your flesh while you feel every little bit. I will cut you open to the bone, then drop maggots into your flesh to keep it constantly cleaned out, where you can feel them writhing as they eat away at the dead flesh. I will make water taste like bile, and I will leave you soaking in your own waste. Then I will make you beg to be sent back to Orochimaru as a lab rat, because it will be eminently preferable to what I will put you through. Am I clear? Tayuya felt like an animal, trapped and pinned down on a laboratory table and then submitted to its own dissection while still alive and without any anesthesia. She could practically see her mouth already filled with the biting taste of bile and she struggled to keep her bowels in check. Still, she managed a quick, panicked nod. Good, Tsunade left up the intent for a moment longer before reining it in, because then, when I was done, I'd heal you up as good as new and let Jiraiya have his turn. Ah, princess, you do care. Jiraiya stated cheerfully, smiling at Tayuya in a way that scared her as much as Tsunade's glare had. Do you really need me to tell you what I do, Tayuya-chan? Because I can guarantee you'd probably faint before I got even halfway through it. I'm very creative. Tayuya just whimpered like a broken animal and slowly shook her head. Good, Jiraiya patted her atop her head, because, after I was done with you, I'd give you to Anko. And she was Roki's apprentice. That was apparently as far as she could hold her bowels. Tsunade wrinkled her nose and shook her head. Thank you, Jiraiya. Now I have to have someone change the bed sheets. I try, Jiraiya said cheerfully. Oh. Anko had just entered the hospital when she was caught by a sudden and powerful sneeze. Frowning, she took a moment to sniff the air but found nothing else of irritation. Shaking her head, she then made her way to the room where the Hokage had requested she report to. Knocking politely at the door, she then took up position at the side, leaning back against the wall and waiting for someone to exit. It was a few minutes later that disgruntled orderly pulled a laundry cart out of the room and nodded back into it. They're ready for you now. Nodding neutrally back at the orderly, Enko stepped into the room, her hands in the pockets of her trench coat. "You wanted to see me, boss lady?" Tsunade looked up and nodded her head in Enko's direction as Jiraiya gave a half-hearted wave from where he was rubbing his face. "Enko, good, you're here." Enko didn't miss the stiffening and paling of the red-haired girl in the room, dressed in only a hospital gown, watching her as if she had suddenly turned into her former teacher at the mention of her name, nor the look of horrified apprehension. "This is Tayuya. Tayuya, this is Enko Midarashi." "Yes. That Enko? She is going to be supervising you while getting you some clothes and equipment," Tsunade stated simply. "Tayuya is the other surviving member of Orochimaru's Little Sounds, like the one we gave your department." "I suppose I don't get to play with her then?" Enko stated with a slight pout. "The fat one already broke. I barely even got started and he was already ready to spill his guts." "She's Naruto's. Talk to him about it," Tsunade stated simply. Tayuya swallowed heavily as she quickly realized that she was going to want to stay on her new master's good side. "Goody," Enko agreed with her hands rubbing together as she looked at Tayuya. "Fortunately, I have an in with the brat." "You see, his girlfriend? My apprentice." As she was led out of the room, still clad in nothing but the horribly brief and ugly hospital gown, Tayuya wondered if she'd even try to behave or if she was simply damned from the start. Sometime later, in the dressing room of a store far nicer than she was used to being able to enter, she was staring from one mirror to another, her long hair pulled to the side as she attempted to grasp the full extent of the change. The back of her neck was naked of anything but smooth, soft skin, lacking the 3 hooks of Orochimaru's cursed seal. Between her shoulders, however, she could see the curling spiral of what she assumed was the one that had replaced it. It was familiar in a way that tugged at the back of her mind but didn't quite ring into her recall. Sighing, she shook her head and lightly tossed her hair back over her shoulder, covering both once more as she looked back at what she'd been given. And again, she felt a grimace of distaste. "Does it have to be a thong?" she asked almost petulantly. "It could be nothing?" Enko offered helpfully back at her. "Besides, what are you complaining about? You have the ass for it." Tayuya blushed almost the same shade as her hair before growling softly, "That's not the point. They're just really uncomfortable. Be glad you're not going to be wearing what Sasuke is. We're only making you wear one piece of girly clothing. Now, try on the rest of the outfit and look it over." Sighing, Tayuya mentally admitted that the woman was right. Not that she'd ever vocalize it. Grumbling softly, she started with the gray pants, loose everywhere but her ass, with plenty of pockets to fill with various tools and tricks. That had always been something she disliked about the Sound 4 uniforms, they had practically no pockets at all. She tapped up her ankles and calves, sliding her feet into the provided sandals before taking a look at herself in the mirror once more. So far, not bad, if nothing else she'd be keeping the pants. Next, she pulled on the top, a black, cropped, long-sleeved piece that covered the entirety of her back and her neck almost up to her jaw, but left the middle of her back exposed and her seal plain to see. Again, despite the exposure, it wasn't a bad look as she took a moment, posing in front of the mirror before continuing. A gray vest, matched to her pants, was pulled over her shoulders, filled with plenty of pockets. Over her hands, she pulled on a pair of fingerless black leather gloves. Then, to finish it, a simple black bandana covered her head. Grudgingly, she admitted she actually found herself somewhat liking the look. "Well? Don't keep us in suspense, Red. Come on out and show us how you look." For a moment Tayuya sighed and shook her head before squaring her shoulders, turning, and purposely walking out of the dressing room. Enko was grinning happily. Next to her she could see the shorter blonde girl she remembered showing up with the group who looked at her with a sharp scrutiny in her unreadable blue eyes. Next to her she saw the familiar form of Kin, who was glaring at her with dark, angry eyes and the taller blonde with cold, dark green eyes. Finally, there was her new master, looking more than slightly bored with everything. Which, she had to admit, stung a bit. She wasn't a classic beauty or a model or anything like that but, damn it, she was good looking. She knew that much. "Not bad," Enko agreed with a pleased, preening smile. "I do good work." "Excellent. Can't we just kill her and be done with it?" Kin asked plaintively. "No, Naruto," Ino and Enko stated in unison. "Cripple?" she asked hopefully. "No. Hurt some?" she asked again, only to receive a group of looks. "Annoy? You do that to everyone anyway," Temari noted with a snort. Tayuya just glared back at Kin the whole time. "Do you have any idea what that bitch did to me?" Kin stated with a snarl. "And you smashed her face in already?" Ino cut in, and beat her down in a fight. When Kin started to protest again, Ino cut her off once more. "You want more? Save it for the sparring." Tayuya had a feeling that she was not looking forward to what was going to happen when the spar happened. Oh, that evening found the three spoils stripped down to hospital gowns and forced to sit on monitoring seals in a mostly empty hospital room. Damn it, why can't you just use her for this and let us relax? Kin demanded as she shifted uncomfortably on the cold floor, glaring at Tayuya. Because 3 sets of data are better than just one, Shizen responded without even looking at Kin as she inspected each of the seal arrays with a critical eye. But, Kin protested again before turning her head and glaring at Tayuya, this is all your fault. Yes, because I fucking asked to be turned into a god's damned slave and be stuck with your constant whining for the rest of my shitty life, Tayuya snapped back with a glare and a growl. And now is when she finally starts to open up her mouth again, Temari stated with a sigh of irritation. Couldn't you have waited until after all this was done before you started to run your mouth like another bitch? What would be the point? You really like listening to her stupid fucking bitching like she has any more of a choice in what happens in this than we do. Tayuya responded as she glared back at Temari. No, but now I have 2 whiny voices I'm forced to listen to, Temari responded back with a glare. Girls, Shizen stated sweetly as she looked at all 3 of them, if you don't kindly behave and only speak to have a nice, polite conversation, I'll have to conclude that you have entirely too much energy. Fortunately, I have a wonderful little training regime that was developed to push ANBU into wartime shape. The girls all wisely shut up. Oh, Sasuke shivered as she lay on the floor completely naked. She'd already had the various symbols drawn on her skin, she'd already been prepared. Now, they were just waiting for Naruto. She heard a shuffle of movement behind her. Then she could feel a warm, calloused hand pressed onto the small space of untouched flesh between the blades of her shoulders. Immediately, she went still, afraid to even breath as she could feel the brush return to her skin, and the pattern completed from one to the other. A part of her wanted to speak, to turn around, to throw herself into his chest and break down, crying, begging for forgiveness. A different, darker part of her wished she had a kunai she could use to cut open his throat. Both were forced down beneath a melancholy resignation. I take it you remember what to do, brat, the voice she wasn't familiar enough with to place, but it was male, and older, but not elderly. How could I forget? Naruto shot back with a light growl as his hand almost clenched into her back. I just want to get this over with. The tone was angry, indignant, and maybe even a little cold. So like indifferent from what she remembered of her teammate. It was obvious he didn't want to be there, that he didn't want to be doing this. She didn't know whether to laugh out loud or just break down and start crying. Most men would have killed to be in his position. One more pretty girl to add to his little harem, the only man to own an Uchiha so completely. But he wanted absolutely nothing to do with it, nor with her. All right, Kurama, you wanted this, let's do it already, she heard and, briefly, she wondered who Kurama was before her world exploded into a world of rush of something she couldn't describe. The world became narrowed down to the experience of that warm, rising wave of power beginning to steadily pulse through her body. She could feel the way her whole body seemed to pulse to the rhythm of what she thought was Naruto's heart. And then the pulsing flow of yellow flowed over her. To those watching, they were both 2 bodies of glowing yellow chakra, Naruto's eyes a burning, calm crimson as Sasuke opened her mouth as if to speak, only for no words to come out. Before them, her eyes flashed wide open and they could see as her Sharingan activated. Then, before their eyes, it matured and then mutated into a pattern none of them recognized. There was a pulse, a beat of the heart, and then the color bled away into a pale white sheen and a spiral coiling all the way to the center of her eyes. She opened her mouth, her eyes twisting and rotating in an almost mesmerizing display, before suddenly her scream filled the air as the mark on her shoulder erupted, trying to spread a poisonous darkness down into her glowing body. In response, the glow only seemed to intensify as Naruto bared sharp, curved fangs and let out a dangerous, angry growl. Bit by bit the darkness was forced back, pushed to recede into the small mark it had previously been contained in. Then, like a squeezed zit, it pushed up building beneath the pressure of the golden chakra eating, burning away at it from beneath. It was stronger than Tayuya's. It fought back. And then a great maw rose out of her flesh, the Kyuubi's mouth, teeth, jaws on either side of the rising pustule of darkness. And then a great swirling sphere, so very much like a raisingan swelled in the back of its throat and then began to eat into the darkness, grinding it away. Suddenly it shot out of the formed mouth launching into the air and taking the remains of the seal with it before detonating in first an implosion, then a resulting explosion that bathed the room in glittering sparkles of chakra trace, before the Kyuubi's face smirked and was drawn back into the golden glow, receding back into Naruto's body. Sasuke's eyes spun a moment longer before falling back into the familiar black as she collapsed back onto the floor, the familiar spiral seal formed on her back. Above her, Naruto tiredly turned and glared at Tsunade and Jiraiya. I am not doing that again. The pair could only nod mutely in agreement. Oh! Perched atop the Hokage's head, Naruto stared out across the expanse of Konoha bathed in amber hue of the setting sun, feeling Ino's arm threaded through his as her head rested against his shoulder. Behind him, Temari stood, staring off into the horizon. Kin sat down on his other side, leg dangling over the ledge as she looked boredly, almost contemptuously, down on the village. Behind them, under the watchful eye of Anko, Yugugo and Heiate, Tayuya was playing a light, experimental tune on her new flute, testing out its range. The final girl could hardly be recognized as Sasuke Uchiha. Her face was expertly done up in subtle shadings with thick, smoky lashes and soft, glistening lips painted a glistening crimson and framed by silken black tresses. Slender fingers, capped in a polish the same color as her lips, lead to smooth, graceful arms all the way up to where naked shoulders met the practically molded black, cropped halter top. Mesh armor covered from her middle finger back up to her upper arms. A matching set lead from her heeled sandals up to her mid-thighs like fishnet stockings, leaving a smooth, inviting expanse all the way to the tight little black mini skirt. Sasuke could no longer be confused with a boy by any measure of the word. Kakashi and Jiraiya were watching her like hawks, never letting her out of their sights as she stood the furthest back, as if trying to hide herself from Naruto's sight, her face covered in more than a touch of blush. Sipping a warm saucer of sake, Tsunade looked down at Naruto and couldn't help but feel a slowly growing swell of expectation. Seated atop the head carved in the likeness of his Minato Namikaze, Naruto couldn't help but feel that now, more than ever before, things had changed in an irrevocable manner. As he stared out across the village that had been his home his whole life, he remembered the flashing grins of Kisame and Orochimaru smirking at him with a smug, confident superiority. He remembered the look on the face of Kabuto. He remembered the subtle, unspoken words describing the situation with Sasuke. The world was changing. Now it was time for him to change with it. Team 7 was gone, broken in a way that couldn't be repaired. From the ashes of burning away the final link when he and Kurama had placed the seal upon Sasuke, here he knew that he would have to start making real choices about his future. The challenges that were coming would only get harder and harder to defeat. He was about to become a hunted man. So, tonight he would mourn the past. Tomorrow he started to fight for his future.